Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If this side. Today we will be seeing, what if Deku got Quirk virus? Now before we move ahead with the fic, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. I just want you guys to know that if anyone needs to talk about anything in complete secrecy, my door is open. That's what Kaminari had said on the first day of quarantine to the assembled students. Most of them hadn't taken him too seriously, incorrectly assuming they could deal with whatever problems the quarantine could throw at them. And yet, as the weeks stretched on, more people seemed open to the idea, until finally Jiro had decided to finally give it a go. She had been avoiding it, fearing that the serious conversation would bring out the feelings for Kami she had buried for so long. But their situation was really starting to weigh on her. So swallowing her emotions, she knocked on his door. "Come in." Jiro quietly stepped into his room. It was, as usual, an absolute tip. Jackets and food packaging was strewn everywhere. Kaminari sat on the bed, holding a game's controller. The game in question, a fighting game starring All Might, was paused but still quietly playing music in the background. "What brings you here? Wanna go on the game? Or are you finally going to confess your undying love to me?" Very funny Sparky Jiro laughed, even as her heart jumped into her mouth. The jokes that Kaminari made about her asking him out were half the reason she feared doing it for real. "No, I'm taking you up on that offer. I need to talk." Kaminari's face changed in an instant, suddenly becoming quite serious. "Well then, take a seat," he intoned as he gestured towards the bed. Jiro nervously sat down, trying to think about what to say first. Finally, she just decided to talk. Just to talk. I'm scared. I'm really scared. I know that I don't really have a reason to be, since I'm safe here and I know my family are too, but I'm still scared. I've never had to do this before. I've never had so little freedom in my movements, in my actions, in everything. And it scares me. No matter how much people tell me that this will all blow over, I can't help thinking, what if it doesn't? What if our entire lives change after this, or worse? What if we're trapped in this building forever? And I know what you're going to say, that's ridiculous, that'll never happen. But I'm still scared. I can't live like this. I'm scared that it will do things to me, things that I won't be able to fix. It's not healthy to be locked in one place for too long. And the fact that we are being forced to is making me worried about what it'll do to me. I know it's selfish to just focus on how it'll affect me and how much I wish it was over just so it'll stop inconveniencing me, but it's the truth. Jiro stopped. She had only just realized she was shaking. Kaminari laid a comforting hand on her leg, smiling at her. "You want to hear something?" Kaminari smiled softly, gently. "I'd love to. It's okay to be scared. Our situation is honestly terrifying. I'm scared too. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say something like don't worry, this will all be over soon, cause that isn't true and it won't help. But I will tell you this. Human beings are survivors, we can get through anything. We've been in wars that shook the planet and the very earth itself trying its best to kill us. And we've just plowed through it all. But we survived those because we've had each other people to be with. This quarantine has taken that away from us, so of course we're struggling. But I know we're strong enough, that you're strong enough, to power through this. Cause that's what we always do." Jiro laughed, almost without humor. "That was too smart for you, Sparky. What books have you been reading? And also, when did you learn how to read?" "Cheeky. And for your information, Intro to Human Psychology and What Makes Us Unbreakable." "Don't look so shocked, I have to keep myself occupied somehow." Jiro seemed to see Kaminari in a whole new light now. "I'm impressed." Her heart screamed at her to tell him how she felt, and as much as she tried to ignore it, she knew she was fighting a losing battle. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" "Sure, what is it?" "Can I stay here for a while?" Kaminari looked surprised. "What, like for the night?" "Yeah, maybe. I just want to be with someone, you know." "Of course, don't even stress about it." Jiro cuddled up to Kami as he restarted his game. Slowly, as she started to drift off, she realized she needed to tell him the truth of how she felt. "Kami, yeah, I love you." Kaminari looked at her, head resting on his lap, half asleep. Bright violet hair in her eyes. "I love you too. We'll get through this together, don't worry. You're the best." And with that she fell asleep, and dreamed of freedom. Well, that was fun enough I guess, but let's look around for something else. Oh, this looks spicy. The observer had been at this for a while and was never tiring from seeing how many different versions of Earth were dealing with something similar, and how they were reacting to this annoyance. UA Dorm Earth 6759. F seeking. 4 weeks already and we have no idea when it is going to end. I'm stuck here with you useless morons, Deku, and the idiot squad. Hoping that Deku doesn't explode and kill us all if he gets infected, Bakugo grumbled. He was getting stir-crazy being confined to the UA dorms with everyone else. Since no one was allowed outside, none of them could be infected unless something went wrong. But that also meant that they were living together on an extended holiday, annoying the sit out of Bakugo. They couldn't even learn anything due to teachers also having to remain in their houses. Lunch Rush, Nezu and Recovery Girl were the only heroes on site besides Aizawa. As such, they couldn't do anything except wait and use the stuff they had in their rooms already. This had resulted in said idiot squad whining we're bored. On the 3rd day of the 4th week of quarantine and for Izuku to be more cautious around others considering everyone thought his quirk getting the trigger virus would cause him to explode and destroy UA. When it came to what each student was doing, some handled it well, like Ada and Momo, who would constantly study together. They even made a schedule for everyone, enforcing the hand-washing policy like the parents of the class they were. Takoyami was also handling self-isolation very well considering he was clearly an introvert. It suited his emo loner sh quite well. Having said this, dark travesty will surely bring me ever closer to the pitch-black depths I need as a hero. Whatever that meant. Aoyama meanwhile was handling the situation poorly. Moi's very sparkling beauty should be allowed out for all to see, not to be cooped up in a tormented cage such as this. This simply cannot do. I must fashion myself into a work of pure art, for when this is over I can shine more radiant than ever. He had been in his room the last few days crying over his lack of hair care product, and gnawed at all the cheese he could get his hands on in a force of stress cheesing. Suyu was fretting over her family and had been heard crying every so often due to being away from her family during the pandemic. She and Izuku were both like this really. He was worrying over his mother on a daily basis. They were each other's source of comfort in this, something which did not go unnoticed by Uraraka, who had taken the notion quite well. Perhaps because she was more so worried about her parents' financial situation considering construction work was non-essential. From what she could gather, they were receiving government assistance, and UA was personally sending stipends to parents who were not well off so that their students would have a home to go to after this whole affair. Lena had been locked in his room indefinitely due to people not trusting him not to hatch some plan to get the girls in some compromising situation in hopes of getting something unsavory out of it. He wouldn't have done, but people didn't know where he would stop and as such didn't actually trust him enough to not be let out, aside from when he needed food and the bathroom. Then it was time for someone to be on minded duty. He didn't mind it as much as some would have thought, having his own stockpile of materials featuring his favorite pro heroes and an active imagination. Koda was fine so long as he had company. He was used to having tons of animals around him, but due to restrictions on animals being let in, he had to seek comfort in people. And of them he went mainly to Jiro due to her being one of the few he could confide in. Ajiro and Hagakure were basically with each other at all times. Ajiro subjected himself to getting his hair and makeup done, to his chagrin, though it made her very happy and he didn't actually look half bad. In return, he taught Hagakure martial arts. She wasn't awfully skilled at first, and Ajiro had her wearing long sleeves and trousers to make sure her leg work and positioning was correct. Bakugo was getting more touchy on a daily basis and was also doing anything for entertainment, which included looking at the crocheting DVD and kit that UA had in the dorms for some reason. He was onto his 5th scarf and 3rd hat with tassels. He had hooked Sato into it as well, mainly because he didn't want to be the only person doing it and Sato hadn't PSS him off yet. This had given Sato some ideas for cooking at the very least, and he had made some hat-shaped cakes for people to try. Zero had started sticking objects to the wall out of boredom, including Bakugo when he was sleeping. That had been the funniest thing so far, with second being a lamp that had almost fallen on Aizawa's head when he came in once. Kirishima had set himself stupid exercise challenges to improve his quirk considering he had nothing better to do. Bakugo pointed out he could try to study, but Kirishima had pushed that aside while drinking his last available protein shake. Kirishima had so far finished 1,000 sit-ups and push-ups since he had started a week ago after having played video games with Kaminari for a while, but got bored and was planning to reach 25,000 before the quarantine was done with. The other 4, well, got any Exodia the Forbidden One? Kaminari asked Mina, who held a handful of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, confusing almost everyone who was looking at their game of Go Fish with Yu-Gi-Oh cards, especially because they had regular playing cards already. Go Fish, Mina responded, causing the two onlookers Shoji and Shoto to be the most confused of those in the room, and Mizo Shoji seemed to be vibrating out of anger or annoyance. Shoto went to his room for a few minutes after seeing this and missed out on what Shoji had said after he left. Why are you playing it like that? That's not how you play the game. We have the booster deck rulebook we could look at. We have normal cards to play Go Fish with. Shoji was getting more and more confused with their chaotic absurdity. This was the most angry he had ever gotten in front of his classmates. Partly because of the cabin fever that they were all being affected by. Partly because Yu-Gi-Oh was a fun game to play on its own and he didn't understand why they just didn't play that instead of using the cards to play Go Fish. I dunno. We just did. I think Mina suggested it. Kaminari explained almost nothing through that. I couldn't find the regular playing cards, and both me and Kaminari had Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Mina shrugged at a bewildered Shoji. They're in the game night cupboard. Also, why play Go Fish with an uneven amount of cards? Like, a deck of regular cards only has one set of cards in it. I'm going to take a shower. Shoji had broken his brain at this and gave up trying to figure out the two after 4 weeks of isolation. Before he had the chance to leave, however, Shoto had come back with a briefcase of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, pulled out 3 blue eyes white dragons and declared himself the winner, to which Mina and Kaminari agreed, causing Shoji to give up reason and bang his head in the wall after realizing that clearly none of them knew how to play Go Fish, and that Shoto, for some reason, had suddenly become Seto Kaiba. After a few final strikes with the trio looking on, Shoji regained control of himself and marched off to take a long hot shower. This planet has begun to reject us. Shiozaki Ibara cried, standing in the middle of the common room to the 1B dorms. A plague we have become on this planet, and the planet has begun to fight us. Using the very thing that we have evolved to make us unique, the virus that spreads throughout our air has begun to weaponize our very bodies. Now is his time, my friends, now we am. Is she still going on with this? Honuki rasped, walking into the room with a bag of chips. Hasn't it been like 3 weeks now? Uwais hummed, playing solitaire on his phone while he hung out on the couch. Most of the class were in their dorms, but the few who haven't been driven to their breaking point by Ibara's preaching were lazily hanging around, simply trying to pass the time. When did we agree we'd stop her again? Day 4. Komori popped up from behind him, the shorter girl reaching in and stealing a few of his chips, moving past him to sit with Uwais. I tried filling her throat with fungus to keep her quiet, but she somehow kept going despite it. Wait, when did this happen? Honuki had taken a seat on the armrest of the sofa, carefully eating his own handful of chips. Uwais scratched his nose. I think it was when you and Takage were trying to get some alone time. Monoma had gotten tired of the whole "the end is near" spiel and had tried to put a stop to it. Twasn't very effective, Komori added. Did you just use twasn't? Yeah, why? Uwais had to raise an eyebrow and look away from his phone to properly convey his disappointment in her. The girl just shrugged. I'm trying to expand past puns. Stick to puns. Okay. Honuki leaned his arm on Uwais's head. So, Komori, how's the boyfriend? The class vice president snorted, putting his phone down and abandoning his game. I can only assume poorly. He turned to the now pouting mushroom. You guys got together like, what, 20 minutes before the quarantine announcement? Komori placed her hands on her hips. I'll have you know that Mizo has been nothing but a total gentleman. Uwais leaned closer to Honuki to whisper. I thought that dude's name was Shoji. Yeah, it is. I don't know. I get it. Honuki gave her a lipless, teasing smile. First name basis. That must be a good sign. Has Mizo been treating little Kanoko properly? He teased her, reaching forward to tap her forehead. He has, yes. She answered with her arms crossed. He's very kind, and is sensitive about his mutations. He lives his life very simply, and he wants to be a hero to make the most of himself, and to give back to his community. This guy sounds like a bucket of dead fish. Uwais stage whispered over to Honuki, who snickered. Why are you go? The end is nigh. Ibara called out from her place on top of the coffee table. We must act, we must confess to our bodily sins, we must cleanse ourselves of our impurities, so that we may take our place among the pearly armored legions of his will. Why so mean to him? Komori asked. He hasn't done anything to you too. You're just jealous. Uwais scoffed. Oh yeah, me. I'm jealous of the 7 feet tall, muscular, well-liked guy who has a girlfriend. He trailed off as he listed some of the mutant students' traits, his head falling as he grew depressed. Boom. You alright, Uwais? Honuki rasped, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. This was stupid. I don't want to play anymore. Uwais sounded on the verge of tears, and despite his teasing, Komori still placed a comforting hand on his knee. Keep your head up, Beansprout. You'll get kendo one day, she said, patting his leg. Why? But I'm trying to ask Yaoyorozu out on a date. Oh, she blanched, before shrugging. Yeah, your best bet is to give up. Find a girl more believable. The bandana boy whined, curling up into the fetal position and leaning against Honuki. The skeletal boy sent Komori a withering look, which with his face only looked more dreadful than normal. What did I say? When his chariot stride across the plain, thou will look on in reverence to his will. He will guide us to nirvana, too. Ibara. Honuki's call was enough to shock the girl out of her trance, her grassy head turning to look his way as she swayed on top of the table. You've been at this for 3 weeks. I think this bit has run its course. Why? Her legs had begun to shake, and it appeared she wasn't looking at him, more just towards him. But when was the last time you had anything to eat? You hungry? I did the low. Here, I have some chips. Do you want some? Honuki shook the bag of chips, trying to lure her closer like a cat with a bag of catnip. Ibara carefully climbed down from the coffee table, slinking over to the couch and sitting down silently, cupping her hands together and letting Honuki pour a bit into them. Komori nudged Uwais. Hey, go make Ibara some tea, will ya? Who knows when she last drank something. But I'm sad. He whined. Oh, come on, help us out, will ye? Uwais got off of the couch and trudged over to the kitchen. Oh yeah, Ibara, what kind of tea would you like? Just some jasmine, please, she whispered, and he nodded his head. All right, well, now that the class saint is back to normal, Ibara, would you like to help us tease Komori over her boyfriend? Honuki snickered when Komori punched him in the arm, her much smaller fist proving to do very little damage. No, I am fine, thank you very much, she said idly, nibbling on one of her chips. Honuki and Komori shared an odd look, before the short girl waved her hands in front of Ibara's face. She didn't react at all, simply staring straight forward, eating her chips like she was on autopilot. Komori said, tilted her head curiously. I wonder if that's a bad sign. Honuki hummed, cupping his chin for a second before letting his arms fall to his side. Ah well, questions for later. So, about Mizo, can he extend those fingers too? Why must she be like this? Komori stomped her feet, beginning to throw a tantrum as the skeletal boy devolved into a fit of mocking laughter. Mina paced back and forth, over and over again, from one side of the room to the other. She didn't recall how long exactly she had been in here for. 4 hours maybe. 5. It felt a lot longer, and she couldn't make herself stop moving back and forth. She was restless, anxious, worried, perhaps more worried than she had even been in her life beforehand. Because Izuku was an idiot. It had been a few hours after their encounter with the infected hyper-response guy, and everything was just a mess right now. There wasn't any other way to put it. A complete mess. Everything had just fallen apart in the last few hours, and Mina had to go over it again and again in her head. They had been pinned down, the absurd way in which the Quirk virus had affected its victim palpably, making them dangerous even for pro-heroes to contend with. Aizawa had been knocked out cold pretty much instantly, and the students had reacted on instinct. In true Izuku fashion, the green-haired teenager had taken matters into his own hands and rushed in at the expense of himself. And oh god, was it at his expense this time? Idiot, Mina muttered to herself, grabbing at tufts of her hair. She still struggled to believe that he'd been so stupid. How hadn't he broken this habit already? They had been training to become heroes for 3 years. When he realized that the situation was getting more and more dangerous, he had used his quirk to leap beyond the wall of ice Todoroki had set up, and charged for the infected at as quick a speed as his power would let him. Of course, the infected's quirk responded to his incoming. But with his quirk, Izuku could respond, counter, and hold back the worst of the attacks, coming into direct contact with the infected, preventing them from moving, and letting the pandemic response team take the shot to knock out the infected. And now he was at risk of having caught the virus himself. Of course he was at risk. The virus was capable of transmitting through physical contact. Everyone knew this. It was why they all had to wear gloves now, and why the support department had been working overtime to provide costumes that could either be disposed of as needed, or specialized equipment that wouldn't hinder the user's quirks all that much. Izuku knew this as well as everyone else did, yet he charged in anyway, without even thinking about the risks to himself. That or he considered them irrelevant. Or himself irrelevant. Mina let out another loud sigh, and felt her hands flop to her sides. Once that thought got into her head, she was drained of the pent-up energy she'd been trying to burn by pacing. There was a window on the other side of the room, and she made her way towards it, to see what was going on outside. The streets were empty, about what she expected. On the road, she saw an ambulance headed towards the building. She watched it as it turned the corner and came inside the hospital. She thought to herself that it had to be another person with the virus being brought in for treatment. These days it felt like it was rare for people to be brought here for any other reason. Coming into close contact with an infected person with a quirk like that hyper-response had landed everyone present into hospital quarantine. Mina herself had already been tested, she was just waiting on the results. Izuku had been rushed off to a completely different block, since he had come into direct contact with someone infected. He was at the most risk. Thinking about it made Mina's jaw clench. With a quirk like Izuku's, what on earth would the virus do to him? She hoped he was alright. 3 more hours passed, Mina switched between being anxious as all hell and unable to sit down, to quiet contemplation and absolute stillness. The worst part was the waiting, she concluded to herself. She wasn't normally an anxious person, she dealt with things as they came, tried her best, and just lived with whatever happened afterwards. That was how she'd lived most of her life, from dealing with bullies in her kindergarten, to failing grades or even villain attacks. She took things as they came and did the best she could at the time. Not having any course of action, just being forced to wait. That was what was getting to her more than anything. A nurse with red skin and a set of horns eventually opened the door and spoke to her though. Your test is back. You're clear. Once she heard that, Mina let out what felt like a breath she'd been holding the entire time she was here. Her head dropped along with her shoulders as she sighed. Oh, thank God. If you'll come with me, please, I'll take you to meet with the rest of your group. Mina nodded and stood up, stretched her arms upwards to work out a cramp that had made itself uncomfortably known once she got up, and followed the nurse, making sure she kept a reasonable distance. Better safe than sorry. Curiosity compelled her to ask, how is everyone? The nurse glanced at her clipboard, shifting around a few pages. Your teacher is fine, if shaken up slightly. He's suffered from a few injuries that I suspect will take him off of active duty for a while, but he'll recover in time. Aizawa was okay. That was a relief, Mina thought to herself. The injuries he had suffered were pretty nasty to look at, and reminded her of how he looked after the USJ invasion back in her first year. That infected person you were dealing with is okay as well. The nurse told her, leading the pink girl through the corridors of the hospital. We've managed to put him in binders that stop his quirk from activating. We're considering putting him into a sort of medically induced coma until we can treat the virus. The nurse's face scrunched up at that. It's not a pleasant thought, but I think it's the only way to be sure he can't hurt anyone while he's infected. What else could they do with someone with a quirk like that? The idea didn't sit well with Mina either, but it wasn't like they lived in a quirkless world. Some people who got infected with this virus would just end up being dangerous. Still, she was glad to hear that they were okay. It wasn't like it was their fault that they had acted out because of the virus, or like they could control what their quirk was. As for your friends, the nurse's voice trailed off. Mina felt her spine shiver. What about them? She asked, afraid of the answer, but knowing that she needed to hear it anyway. Most of them are okay, the nurse said. But I'm afraid one of them has tested positive for the virus. Who? As if she didn't already know. According to this, Izuku Midoriya. It didn't surprise Mina all that much. Somehow, she already had a suspicion that that was going to be the case. Izuku had gotten in close. He'd had physical contact with the infected. He'd knowingly put himself at risk there, and it had gotten him infected. It didn't surprise Mina, but that didn't mean it didn't hit her like a ton of bricks. Is he alright? Mina asked immediately. His quirk. He only seems to have a fever. At that, Mina blinked. Just a fever. The nurse nodded. Just a fever. It's an oddity, the virus usually attacks a person's quirk, but it seems to have ignored it in his case. They tilted their head, glancing over their notes. It's not completely unheard of. Some European countries have reported similar symptoms, but they're an exceedingly rare case. We aren't sure if it's a mutation of the virus or if it's an aspect we aren't sure of, but it means that no one is at immediate risk of his quirk being unleashed against anyone. Mina blinked again. Why had the virus affected him differently? What about his quirk made him an exception? She supposed she should just be more thankful that it wasn't causing his quirk to go istic. He could hardly control it back in their first year without shattering his bones. Who knew what the hell could happen if the virus affected his quirk? The only thing she could even imagine was him exploding. The mental image of that occurring was not pleasant. It was an oddity, but she supposed it was at least not as bad as it could have been. Not that that meant he wasn't still at risk. Is he gonna be alright? She asked, feeling her breath hold again. It wasn't like the virus only affected people's quirks. Some people had actually died to the virus directly. A low amount compared to the number of infected, granted. But any percent of fatality when infected with the virus was a prospect that put anxiety into the heart of anyone who knew someone infected. Right now it's strong to say. The nurse told her, honestly. Mina was a hero in training. Heroes in training didn't get to hear the reassurances a civilian would. We're treating him now. The nurse kept talking, going into detail about the procedures they were putting Izuku through, and leading Mina to the reception, but the pink girl had sort of tuned her out. Her mind had wandered off. It was now purely on Izuku. Do you actually think this is a good idea, Midoriya? It wasn't a surprise to Mina in the slightest when she learned that Izuku had signed up to volunteer to help with the quirk virus efforts. He took pretty much every opportunity he could to help people, and the universe just seemed to have a way of bringing the most dangerous and riskiest situations to the foot of Yui. Every time, he was at the forefront of it. Mina was starting to think that he had some sort of second quirk that brought this stuff to his doorstep. Running into Izuku like this had honestly just been a coincidence for Mina. It was the middle of the night, and she'd found herself unable to sleep. Cooped up inside in self-isolation for a few weeks now, Mina found herself getting more and more restless. Whenever she got like this, she was at least able to go on a walk to burn off that energy outside. But now that she was constantly cooped up, she tried to make do by wandering around the student dorms. She was glad they were large, now more than ever, but it wasn't quite the substitute she had been hoping for. Eventually though, she'd wandered towards one of the living spaces on the first floor, and there was Izuku. She approached him, they spoke, and he revealed his intention to volunteer, and that was where they found themselves now. I don't know if it's a good idea, Izuku admitted jokingly, chuckling slightly. He'd gotten better at throwing light-hearted jokes out since the first year. Compared to back then, he was now an incredibly relaxed sort of person. But it's the right thing to do. I don't know if that makes it any smarter. Me either. So why do it then? Mina asked, no hostility, only concern, in her voice. You'll have to be isolated while you're volunteering in case you bring it back here. And your quirk isn't exactly a good one for this sort of a situation. You'd need to get close to people to use it. That'll put you at risk more. She was making valid points, she knew, because Izuku was nodding his head at all of them. No doubt he'd already wrestled with them himself though. I just need to, he answered. I can't sit here and not do something if I can do something to help. Even if it's just moving supplies or being support or. His hands waved in front of him, like he was trying to pull the right words out of thin air. Something. They then fell back to his sides, and he let out a small sign. What is it with you? Izuku turned his head towards Mina. I really don't get you sometimes. The pink girl said, plainly. Her arms folded up, and she raised an eyebrow at him. You want to be a hero. I get that. We all want to be heroes. But you just keep going, constantly, all the time. You don't stop. Ever. It's insane. Her hand unfolded itself, and with each point she made, she raised a finger. You threw yourself into Save All Might at the USJ. You went nuts on Todoroki at the sports festival. You took on Stain. You went so strong you ended up in a hospital when the League of Villains attacked our summer lodge. You went behind everyone's back and broke the law to rescue Bakugo. Having run out of points on one hand, she brought up the other. You got involved in that raid to Savory, you dealt with that gentle guy, you took on that internship with Endeavor. She paused, then just threw her hands into the air. Pretty much everything that happened in the second year you were involved in. You don't stop. It's insane to me. Finding the right words proved tricky, she found. You throw yourself into stuff that you're not suited for, what your quirk isn't suited for, but you just keep doing it. Even when you might do more good in other places, it's like you have to be on the front, helping people directly, even if it costs you. Don't you ever feel that way? I'd be lying if I said I didn't. Mina nodded. A few seconds of silence fell, as neither knew what exactly to say next. I don't know. She paused. I admire it a lot if I'm honest. Why you do? Izuku blinked and straightened his back at that statement. Once again, Mina nodded. Yeah, you've just been so consistent the entire time I've known you. You jump in even when it makes no sense to and when you're honestly kind of dumb for doing so. Gee, thanks. A single laugh made it past Mina's lips. She sullened up quickly though. I mean it though. It's impressive. More than impressive, honestly. I can't even pretend that I'm surprised you're volunteering. It's not like I'm the only person volunteering here. Izuku insisted, downplaying what he was doing. Todoroki and Yaoyorozu and Shiro are all volunteering as well. I think even Monoma from 1B is too. Isn't he still crazy? He's gotten better about that. I'll take your word for it. Do you think I'd be any help out there? Izuku suddenly asked. The suddenly bluntness of his question made Mina pause again. Don't you think you will? I don't. He trailed off. I want to be there. In case something does happen and my quirk could be useful. If I could be useful. Even if it turns out nothing I do helps. I want to be there. But I want to think I'd be helpful. You're not wrong though. He raised his hands up so he could see the palms of his hands, battered and bent and crooked from the year he spent battering his arms, and cut and blistered from his more recent efforts to regain some control over how his quirk affected his arms. My quirk is dangerous if I'm not careful, and if I got infected, I could end up hurting someone else. That's always a risk with being a hero, isn't it? Maybe, but I don't. If I mess up, I want it to be because I messed up, not some virus that meant I couldn't control myself or my quirk. Do you think I'd be useful out there? Izuku turned to look at Mina directly again, and the expression on his face made him look like he'd just been asked the most obvious question in the world. Absolutely. You've gotten so much better at handling your quirk since our first year. You've got new techniques, new moves, new methods of keeping your acid non-corrosive. You'd be an absolutely valuable volunteer. Yeah, well, I'm afraid of the same thing you are. Hurting people without being able to control it. Mina sighed, her head hanging. And I don't know what to do either. I want to help, but you could volunteer with me. For some reason, that scene had played out in Mina's mind for every day for the last couple of weeks. Every day, when she stepped into the hospital, spoke to whoever was on reception, and stood outside Izuku's room, that scene played out in her mind, over and over again, like a projector movie stuck on a permanent loop. It was bizarre to her how well she remembered it. How she remembered nearly every little detail, every single word they said to one another in spite of it taking place about a month ago now. All the days blurred together at this point. She was at least mildly sure that it was a month ago they had had that conversation. She remembered the conversation clearly, but not when she had had it. That was how much of a mess she found herself in these days. Miss Ishido. Mina lifted her head towards the nurse who spoke to her. I'm afraid you need to leave now. It's past visiting hours. Mina didn't give a verbal response, but she acknowledged what she was told with a small nod. The nurse nodded back to her and tried to put on the usual nurse everything is going to be alright expression, before leaving Mina to leave on her own. By this point, all the nurses knew who she was. The room Izuku had been put into was one with a large glass window in the side of the wall, which allowed anyone to view the inside of the room from the corridor that led to it. Sitting in the corridor by that window was the closest thing to being able to visit Izuku that Mina was able to get. Whenever she visited though, he was nearly always completely asleep. Or so out of it that he didn't realize that she was there. He was usually kept on oxygen providers, or full of drugs, or whatever other contraption he was needed to at the time. She hadn't ever run into him while he was awake. Since he had gotten infected, she found herself unable to rest or relax, barely able to sleep. Whenever she was awake, she was just reminded constantly of that conversation they had had when they decided to volunteer together. She wasn't sure why. She was eternally tormented by it though. It only ever seemed to leave her alone when she was here, when Izuku was in sight. Was it guilt that was affecting her? Guilt that she couldn't have done anything to stop Izuku running out the way that he did? Guilt that she hadn't been able to convince him that going out to volunteer was a mistake? Guilt that she couldn't find a reason that volunteering was a mistake? That in spite of everything, she couldn't convince herself that her or Izuku had done anything that was a mistake? That in spite of the outcome, that this had been a moral good thing that the two of them had done? She didn't know. She just wished that he hadn't ended up like this. All things considered, it was lucky that it was just a flu, and that the virus wasn't affecting his quirk and making him explode all over the place. But that didn't take away any of the concerns she had. If anything, it was a cold comfort. With a sigh, she got up onto her feet. She didn't turn to leave the hospital though. Instead, she stepped next to the glass and looked into it. Looked at Izuku. There was something about him that compelled him to push himself to nth degree, something he wasn't willing to tell other people. Mina doubted she'd be the person he wound up telling, but she could respect that, admire it even. Somehow that made her feel worse though. The two of them had gotten closer over the last few years, but the knowledge that he might not share those drives that made him go this far, something about that felt isolating. Ironically enough, was it messed up to be having thoughts like that when Izuku was like this? Probably. The pink girl sighed again. She turned to leave. Something caught her eye though. Movement. Her head glanced back to the room. Izuku had moved. Every time, no matter how long she stayed here, Izuku had been asleep throughout all of her visits. She couldn't tell if that was because of the illness, or if it was because of whatever drugs the hospital was giving him, or what, but he was always out cold. Now his eyes were open, and she watched him slowly sit up and take a look at his surroundings. He looked tired, somehow, in spite of how much sleep he'd had collectively these last few weeks. Confused as well, like he didn't know exactly where he was. His face was clearer now, and had grown stubbles, unkempt and scattered awkwardly all around his face. His eyes locked with Mina's, and he moved again. Panicking, Mina reacted and looked all around the place. Izuku was sick. He was supposed to not be getting up and wandering around like he was now. He needed rest. He needed to be seen to by the hospital officials. He shouldn't, be up and walking like he was. She looked, wanting to see some sort of hospital official somewhere, anywhere, someone who could help. But she saw no one. Wherever that nurse had just gone, she'd gone there fast. Without other options, she just shouted, Hey, I need help here. Midori is awake and he's walking around. Hey, I. The sound of a thunk made her stop calling for help, and made her look back to the room. Izuku was there, in front of the window. His forehead rested against the glass, and he was looking at her. The glass was soundproof. If he said anything, Mina doubted she'd be able to hear it. She didn't need to hear him though. The expression on his face. That said everything. I'm sorry. Mina's eyes opened up as she understood the look. She'd seen it enough, every time he'd done something stupid or had made his friends worry for his safety. He seemed to know the situation he was in, and he could see Mina clearly. She wasn't exactly anything better than an absolute wreck herself, and she knew it. Her hair was even more unkempt than normal, longer than normal. She had bags under her eyes. When he wanted to be, Izuku was very insightful with things like that. A glance seemed to be all he needed this time. Willingly he'd done this to himself, Mina remembered. Willingly he'd thrown himself into a situation that would end up with him most likely getting infected. But he had done so anyway, because of whatever the hell was going on in his head at any one time, or that compulsion he always felt to be there to help people immediately, amend the consequences to himself. But he seemed to understand the effect it had had on his friend. Just from a single look at her. For a few seconds, Mina didn't know how to act, how to respond, how to do anything, really. She found herself just looking at him. Part of her didn't know how to react to that expression, to what it meant. Then she reached out and rested her palm on the glass. It was practically the only right now that she would be able to put her hand on his shoulder, to grab his hand, or hug him or do anything. The glass would prevent her from getting infected. It took Izuku a moment to realize what she was doing. When he realized, he pressed his palm against the same section of glass. Izuku was a reckless idiot. Mina wouldn't hear anything else from that. He was a reckless moron. But that in of itself was part of what made so many people admire him. It certainly made her admire him, longing to shake that recklessness out of him by physical force if need be notwithstanding. She smiled at him. It was a weak smile. She couldn't offer anything else. But she did manage to smile at him. He offered an equally weak, but still sincere smile of his own. That was when the doctors and nurses finally arrived. They didn't look away from one another until both were physically moved from one another though. A month was a long time to wait when it came to something like the Quirk virus. Like the universe was somehow moving slower, and the very concept of time was messing with her. Mina struggled to be patient at the best of times. Each day though, she went to the hospital. Each time since then, Izuku was awake, at least for a while. The glass prevented them from exchanging words, but the expressions they were able to give one another were enough. To help him pass the time, she would bring books and news articles that she would hold up to the window for him to read. Occasionally she would come with others, the other volunteers, of course. When he was announced cured though, she came on her own. Mina wouldn't claim to understand how medicine or science or how any of that stuff all worked, so she couldn't even begin to explain what the process must have been. How they had kept Izuku alive during that time, if he was ever in any noticeable danger whatsoever outside of the fever, she had absolutely no idea. When she arrived at the hospital though, she saw Izuku waiting for her. He was clean, had managed to get a shave, and a set of more casual clothes had been handed to him by the hospital staff. The second she was in reach, she threw herself into giving him a massive hug. He returned it more or less instantly. I'm glad you're okay, she said. I'm sorry about, Yeah, I know. They separated. You feel okay? Mina asked. I'm all right, Izuku answered cautiously. They kept me in for a few days extra to be sure I was rid of the virus. It's weird though. He paused. I'm still clean, don't worry. We've still been getting tests and masks and everything. I got one before I came here. Oh, good. He let out a sigh of relief. Good. I really don't want to catch this again. You say that. You're not gonna stop this volunteer work, are you? Looking to Mina for a second, Izuku then shook his head. No, I'm not. Somehow this doesn't surprise me. I can't. I can't after I've had this myself. I need to help people who are dealing with this. I'm with you. Izuku blinked. Why you are? Oh yeah. You think I wouldn't be? No, I remembered what you said back when I asked if you wanted to volunteer with me. And you weren't sure. Perspective, I guess. Mina shrugged. Midoriya, there is something about you I don't get. You're like, insanely devoted to this rescue stuff to the point I don't even know if it makes sense. But, this affected you and... Her hands twitched slightly. I get it. Izuku didn't say anything for a moment. And then he smiled. He was a reckless idiot. But Mina couldn't help but admire him for it. It was Minoru's idea. Everyone had just accepted that perversion was his main personality trait at this point, expecting it had made them numb to most of the effects. Though, he was working on a social filter and controlling himself. It did not stop or his let's say gusto due to the fact that he wanted to be stepped on by any girl in their year. Denki was the one who sold it though, old-fashioned, but what better way to spend an evening stuck in the dorms with everyone than getting cozy with each other. Most of the class was on board, but it took more convincing for a few other students in particular. Getting every last member of the class to agree to be in the common area was truly an accomplishment. It was a Thursday evening. An empty Ramune bottle sat in the center of the circle of 20. Denki clapped his hands, rubbed them together and began. You've got 3 options. Option 1, you can go classic and smooch whoever it lands on if the bottle pairs you more than once. You gotta up your game or take it to heaven. Option 2, you can take it to heaven sooner by going into our designated closet, the elevator, and whoever it lands on will join you. 7 minutes, no more no less. Option 3, if you're not satisfied with who it lands on, you can take a truth or dare from them. No take-backsies. Once you've stated your choice you have to stick with it. Refusals end with punishments befitting the infraction. He made eye contact with every other student, a lopsided grin on his face, to be sure the rules were understood. Question, Toru piped up. Who is going first? The question sounded almost staged. The other girls, save Mina, who often joined either Denki or Toru in their shenanigans, glanced at her questioningly. Had she been in on the planning of this too? Denki pulled out his phone and waved it. So glad you asked, Toru-chan. Our good friend, random number generator. All of our numbers will be our class ranking. Simple and fair, right? Denki sounded like he was on some sitcom game show and the students who were bribed into coming shifted restlessly. Denki pulled up the generator, did his typing, and as he was about to share the results, a commotion was heard at the door. Before they could groan, Monoma, the antagonistic student, had his mouth open and a crazed look on his face. Heard through a G-vine that the Grand and Ilrius Class 1A was having a party. Are we of Class 1B not good enough to spend an evening outside of school? With the force of the blow to the back of his head was not enough to knock him out, but the students who resided in the building were grateful it at least got him to shut up. For the 1000th time and not the last, sorry about him. You don't mind if we join in your fun tonight, do you? Kendu asked. Several shakes of heads and room being made for the half of Class 1B that decided crashing a 1A party would be infinitely more entertaining than anything they had personally planned for the evening. Once the 10 had settled, Minoru spoke up. We were using our class ranking as a numbering system, but since we don't know yours off the top of our heads. He glanced around for confirmation. There was a general consensus that no, it really hadn't been discussed between classes. After a moment's pause longer where Kendu, as the class rep, was not forthcoming with the information, Minoru continued. So we'll just assign you numbers arbitrarily. Someone write this down. Tetsu 21, Kendo 22, Honuki 23, Takage 24, Tsunotori 25, Kiwaro 26, Awase 27, Yanagi 28, Fukadashi 29, and Monoma 30. Monoma opened his mouth to protest, but Kendu simply raised her hand and he shut himself up. Great, so before you guys joined us, I just generated a random number for the 20 of us. I don't feel like going again, but we got 13. Achako-chan, please do the honors of starting us off. The darling of Class 1A startled just a bit, perhaps unconsciously using her quirk on herself as her body lifted and hair poofed out more before she shook herself, and gave a determined nod. With her pinky lifted, she grabbed the bottle at its center and gave it a FLCK of her wrist. Everyone sat back as the bottle spun, 3 rotations, 4, 5. Time seemed to slow around them as the bottle made yet another rotation, but seemed to slow minimally. It was strong to tell what Achako was thinking as she stared the bottle down. She had that determined look on her face like she was about to spar with whomever the bottle landed on. Or maybe she was willing it to land on a specific person. The bottle was slowing noticeably now. The majority of 30 students held their breath, not wanting to skew the results. After just a couple more rotations, the bottle finally slowed to a stop. There was a heartbeat of absolute stillness before a spark popped off of Katsuki's hand. All at once, Jiro launched himself in front of Ochako. Shaoji turned and fanned out his dupli arms, and Class 1B balked at the sudden action, not familiar with the reputation of the person the bottle was pointing to. He hadn't even had time to fully register what had happened before the party erupted. It was pointing at him. Bless his luck, the first spin had landed on him, from the second cutest in class girl nonetheless. You don't have to do this, Chako-chan. It's totally okay, we can have a redo. Mina sounded a bit desperate in her consolation. He wilted inside a bit at the thought but wasn't entirely put out by it. At least he would have the knowledge that this had, in fact, happened. Ochako stared at the tip of the bottle, her eyes trailing to where it decided the first move in this game should go. She watched in almost slow motion as the party erupted. Mina's comment had her eyebrows furrowing. She glanced at Denki, who had told them the rules. She had options. She could say truth, nothing wrong with choosing that. But he looked a little sad. Ochako couldn't help but feel a little bit bad at how the class's reaction affected him. No take-backsies, Ochako said, getting up from her spot and kneeling in front of where he was sitting. She offered a small smile and leaned in to give him a peck on the cheek. She retreated but not in a rush. Linda Minoru was in a heaven completely separate from the elevator in this game. He could carry that small high for the rest of the night. Sometimes life never goes the way you're expecting. That was the tough lesson that Amajiki Tamaki had to learn throughout his life. Sometimes, no matter how many right decisions you make or how strong you work, unfortunate things will happen. Of bad luck, no one is safe from the devil's paintbrush. But just because you can't control what life throws at you, that doesn't mean you're unable to fight against it. There's many ways to prepare yourself for at least a couple of things life will throw at you, usually through methods of prevention rather than solving the issue. Some problems can't be solved, so it's more reasonable to stop it from happening to begin with. Examples being chronic diseases, bad grades, and poorly planned trips. All problems that with the proper precautionary steps can always be prevented. So what were the precautionary steps Tamaki could have taken to prevent being stuck in a house with his girlfriend Jiro, that he just recently made his ex-girlfriend, who is sitting on the same couch as him right now as they awkwardly watch TV together? Tamaki was always careful in life, and despite his low self-esteem, he's actually intelligent. Why the hell is he in this situation? When he woke up this morning, this was not the way he expected his day to go. He was expecting to have a solemn, lonely day, where he sulked all day alone while regretting his recent life decisions. Not this awkward scene that seems like it was taken straight out of a movie or some mediocre teen drama show. How the hell did he get here? Trying his best to keep his nerves, Tamaki slowly recounted the events that lead to this through answering smaller questions one at a time. Why do I feel like my heart is about to burst? Oh right, because my ex-girlfriend is sitting right next to me. She wasn't really that close, but to someone with as much anxiety as Tamaki, she might as well be on top of him. Okay, that was easy, he thought. Now he needs to work his way bit by bit to answer the real question. How the hell did he get in this situation? Why is he trapped inside his own home? Why does he have an ex-girlfriend? Why is his ex-girlfriend there with him? Why is he trapped inside? Because there's a FC King pandemic going on outside. Something called the QIDXY virus is spreading like wildfire throughout the country, and I needs to self-isolate myself for my own protection as well as others by staying indoors where it's safe. For someone like me, that sounds like being rewarded for being an introvert. What does this virus do? From what I remember, symptoms of this virus include severe fever, nausea, tiredness, dry cough, and most dangerous of all, dysfunctional quirk triggers. Apparently this virus messes with how people trigger their quirk, and now people on the street are uncontrollably firing off their quirks in excessive amounts. Why does this virus call for such a quarantine? Well, at face value this doesn't sound so bad. Only a fool can imagine the destruction that could happen if someone with a super powerful and destructive quirk got this virus. I remember there's some freshman Jiro told me about named Bakugo whose quirk can be summed down to making his sweat explode. If that boy unknowingly gets the virus and goes to the gym for something as small as a light workout, boom, that entire building is blasted out of existence, and God knows how many people died. All because some teen didn't skip FC King leg day. There was a certain incident covered by the news involving someone with a magnetic quirk, and a steel porcupine quirk showed everyone how dangerous this virus can be. After that, it didn't take that long for the government to start calling for self-quarantine, but mostly enforced it for the areas that were highly infected and the surrounding areas around it in an attempt to prevent the whole country from completely stopping productivity. It was a really stupid move that I warned. Tamaki, not wanting to take any chance of him contracting it, took early precaution and socially distanced himself at home for the last couple of days, so when the outbreak happened in his area, he was one of the few that was well prepared. Why is he trapped inside his own home? Answered. Who's Jiro? She's my girlfriend. Or at least she was my girlfriend till almost a week ago. How did we meet? We first met when I went to her freshman class as a senior to tell them how important internships were, but that was more of a group presentation that I failed horribly in contributing than a personal one-on-one interaction. It's impossible that I stood out to anyone at that moment except for being that intimidating senior who spent the entire time staring at a wall. We didn't have a proper interaction until Kirishima convinced me to go what was supposed to be a small gathering with some other student. I only agreed to go because I heard Nejire and Mirio was going to be there, meaning I was guaranteed a few people I was comfortable talking to, and it actually seemed to mean a lot to my junior if I went. While we don't talk much, I still think Kirishima is a very promising hero if fatgums, and my experience with him proves anything. But apparently the definition of a small gathering between us were vastly different. To me that meant between 4-8 people planning to meet at one place. To Kirishima this meant the entire 1A and 1B class as well as a few other people from different classes. I was this close to vomiting on the spot and only stayed because I didn't want to break my promise with my junior, but actually enjoying myself there was impossible. Being the oldest one among all the freshmen as well as being part of the famous UAS Big Three did nothing but draw all sorts of unwanted attention to me, and it only got worse when Mirio and Nejire came over to try to ease my nerves. While I truly appreciate their efforts, it seems they forgot what gets me to me to begin with. Having friends I've known for years with me to talk to was nice, but in a position where I wanted as little attention to me as possible, in a situation where I already stand out. Having one of the most appealing and beloved third year with the best student in the entire school by your side was not ideal. Eventually it all became too much, and I managed to escape that torture room without making anyone feel guilty by claiming that the loud chatter was starting to give me a headache and needed some fresh air. I was about 6 steps away from heading straight home, preparing to give everyone the excuse that my headache symptoms got worse when he stepped outside, and I went home to take some medicine, but then I heard something. It sounded so angelic and familiar that I felt almost compelled to investigate what it was. It didn't take too long to find out it was actually Jiro on her phone humming to herself outside of the building. I don't know what made me go talk to her. Maybe it's because her singing voice was that alluring. Or I just wanted to meet the person who sang so wonderfully at the school's festival. Or it was because I ended up standing there in plain view listening to her hum for so long that she eventually noticed me there, and I couldn't get out of that situation without a conversation unless I wanted to add a creep factor to the general perception people had of me. One thing led to another, and after a few private meetups we started dating. Till we broke up. Why did they break up? Well, that's that's personal. Why does he have an ex-girlfriend? Answered. SORTA. Why is she there with you? Hey, come on, just because we broke up doesn't mean we can't still be friends, right? Why is she there with you? Okay, fine. She was here to pick up her stuff. I offered to drop her off her stuff at her dorm myself, but she was insistent on coming over, packing them, and picking them up herself. Something about me not remembering what was hers and not wanting me to mess with how she arranges her stuff. The whole thing took a few days to do, and today was supposed to be her last day. So what happened? Well, right as she was about to start preparing her boxes for travel, that was when an emergency news broadcast came on about the outbreak that's happening in the very area. Of course I didn't want her to risk her own health, so I offered to let her stay here at least until the outbreak cooled down enough where it's safe to go outside. Parents. My parents were out of the country before the outbreak happened and will be staying where they are as a precaution. Thank God their jobs can easily be done online. Hayoka's parents, on the other hand, was a different story. Luckily they were fine with the idea, though her dad did try to intimidate him to watch his hands, only to be told to stop by his wife, since it meant their daughter was safe and with someone they trusted. I can't help but think they were a bit too willing to go along with it. I mean, yes, this is one of the safest options, but they sounded way too cheery. And oh, my daughter is spending a night at her boyfriend's house, then oh, my daughter is going to be stuck with her ex for a day. It makes me wonder if she broke the news to them yet. But that was something I knew best to mess with. I already made enough bad decisions. Why are they watching TV? Because I can't think of anything else we can do together. What do other people do with their ex? Why is he trapped inside his own home? Answered. Why does he have an ex-girlfriend? SORTA answered. Why is his ex-girlfriend there with him? Answered. How did he get in this mess? Oh yeah, that's right. I'm in this mess because a pandemic happened right as my girlfriend came to pick up her possessions. So being the nice person I am, I let her stay here till it's over, and now we're watching TV because we don't know what to do with ourselves. Despite getting the answer he wanted, the conclusion was unfavorable to him. But at least the audience are caught up. The air was obviously tense, palpable, and could be cut through with a knife. Nothing was being said between the two of them, despite them being seated on the same couch. The distance between them was clear, as the only noise that was made in the room for hours was the electronic box in front of them. Endlessly did Tamaki consider saying something to break the silence, but each time he was smacked down with the anxiety of not knowing the right thing to say. Why does talking to girls have to be so strong? I don't know what to say, and I can't tell if she's mad or not. Oh, who am I kidding? Of course she's mad at me. We just broke up because of me. She wouldn't want to talk to me now. Anything I say will probably just piss her off even more. Every so often Tamaki with his uncertain face would glance over to her to see what she was doing, and each time she was doing the same thing, leaning her head against her hand while she watched TV. If someone walked in on them now, they would think he was being kept here against his will by his female captor. I just wished I knew what she was thinking. Curse my inability to ... Well, curse my inabilities. He always hated it when he fell short in something. Everyone always had high expectation of him since he was young, and so when he thinks he can't live up to those expectations, he feels as if he completely disappointed everyone. This thought only reminded him what he's going to lose once this is over, the appealing person he's been staring at for the last couple of hours, Jiro. He can stare at her petite slender body all day long. He doesn't know why she always downplay her appearance when to him she's perfectly fine. He never truly cared about appearances except his own. If he did, then he would not have chosen to intern at an agency whose main hero looks like a giant lemon with legs. What he really enjoyed was her presence. Beyond all his pessimistic thought, she was one of the few people he never had a negative thought of. Instead, he always felt some kind of warmth inside of him whenever he's around her. He was going to miss all the times they spent with one another. Every time Jiro made up an excuse whenever she suddenly hugged him or rested her back against his chest. He loved smelling the violet-scented shampoo off her hair. He'll never get to feel her fair, smooth skin again. She always had to coach him through it whenever they did because of his dubious hand were too inexperienced. But words couldn't describe the tender sensation he got touching her delicate curves. It was a pleasure only matched by eating ice cream on a hot summer day, and the first 10 seconds of chewing bubblegum. He's really going to miss having her around. But he knew it was better this way. For now, all he can do is savor the remaining time he has to see her. Maybe he looked at her for too long because Jiru's uninterested eyes quickly shot in his direction. The swift action stunned him, giving her time to turn her head and catch him red-handed staring at her. She narrowed her eyes, giving him quite a cold stare as she asked, "What?" There was no anger in her voice, but the tone she spoke in felt like she was preemptively spitting out poison, like a lizard warning a predator not to cross the wrong line or else there will be hell to pay. If she ever finds out I compared her to a reptile, she might actually show me hell. Tamaki told himself as he ransacked his brain for a response. I need something to tell her. There with his back against the wall, he had a moment of brilliance. I wanted to change the channel. Can you pass over the remote? This was why he was so easily captivated by her presence. The show they were watching was one he had no interest in. It was something Jiro usually watched when they were together. Usually she'll be in her lap so he can mess with her hair and other stuff while she watched. Without that teddy bear element to keep him entertained, he was completely bored and lost on what to do. His muscle memory must have automatically searched for something similar to that to get attached to. In this case, staring at the woman he usually petted when they watched the show. Man, he wanted to pick her up and cuddle his face into the back of her neck right now. Whatever, take it. His request seemed to not push any of Jiru's buttons as she didn't give him any trouble passing the remote. She had a lot of her usual attitude, but she didn't throw the remote at him or bash it over his head. To him, that was an absolute win. The only thing that dampened his relief was how Jiro got up right after, sparing him only a quick aloof stare and saying, "I'm starved, you mind if I use your kitchen?" His eyes widened in fear as a small chill ran throughout his spine. Jiro was a nasty chef. That's not to say her cooking wasn't bad. When she made something she knew, his discomfort is triggered by how it looked like a hurricane hit every kitchen she cooks in. He was and still is supportive of Jiru's efforts to become good at cooking, even though it's going to be awkward now since she originally did it to be a better girlfriend for him. The ending result of the kitchen, most of the time it ended up being his kitchen she cooked in. Being left in an absolute mess wasn't ideal, especially since he always had to clean up after. Jiro would always tell him that she'll do it by herself since it was her fault, but Tamaki would feel too guilty if he did that to her. Before he could avoid this conflict by insisting that he should cook, which was easy since he was used to cooking because it would be more beneficial to his quirk if he can cook a wide variety of food by himself. Without that pretense of him just being a nice, considerate boyfriend, he wasn't sure if he'll accept it. If I offer to cook, would she accept it? Probably not, but since this is my house and I'm no longer oblique to let her freely use my kitchen, I'll just make something and she'll be forced to eat it or nothing at all. No, that's a bit cruel to do to someone even if they're an ex. I'm the one who suggested she stay here in the place first. It'll seem pretty manipulative if I offer her to stay only to then become very controlling when she's no longer in the condition to leave. Tamaki thought to himself. Truly, he didn't mind if Jiro cooked for herself. The issue comes from the after effect. She literally gets it everywhere. It's quite impressive. Go ahead, he finally replies, watching as she quietly turns away and leaves for the kitchen. I'll let her cook, but we'll wait till she looks like she's struggling before stepping in and helping out. It'll both give me a way not to seem controlling and allow me to minimize the damage, was the internal conclusion Tamaki came to. After waiting 15 minutes, he got up and stealthily tiptoed over toward the kitchen. Jiro should have started by now. It doesn't take long into the cooking process before she starts having trouble. I remember when she tried making fried rice for the first time, it literally took her a minute to set things on fire. I don't even know how it even happened. I just walked in on it. It was a simple plan. A plan that wasn't working when he peeked into the kitchen only to discover that Jiro hadn't even started yet. She was on her phone. What's she doing? Alarming every person on social media that she's going to cook something with #cheflife. How long does it take to look up a recipe? I don't even have that much food in stock for something fancy. Wait, is that why it's taking her this long? We're in lockdown, this is no time to be picky. Tamaki's thoughts were quickly interrupted as Jiru's head turned to his direction. His pointy ears perked up, but he was prepared this time, quickly ducking out of sight. Did he make too much noise? He turned his body flat against the wall before quietly leaning out to take another peek, revealing as little of his body as possible. Jiru seemed to have gone back to cooking, but this time she wasn't on her phone. I'm safe. Tamaki internally cheered to himself. He didn't mess up spying on his ex. That sounded pretty creepy out of context, and he acknowledged that. But for now he needs to focus on finding the right moment. All I have to do is wait, and why is she taking off her shirt? That wasn't an overstatement either. Jiru really was taking off her shirt. She lifted her favorite yellow deep dope shirt off her slim body and over her head, showing off her fabulous designed purple, black BR. Tamaki wanted to remember which shop he went to with her to get that specific brand, but his eyes were more focused on something more important, specifically observing the very dynamic and expressive body movement she was doing, sliding the shirt off over her head. He felt a bit naughty watching her like this, but that didn't mean he was going to stop. I'm just making sure nothing burns. If that didn't have a highly good chance of happening, then I wouldn't be doing this, I promise, Tamaki desperately justified to himself, not realizing how bad it looked that he needed to rationalize keeping an eye on someone in his own kitchen. If that didn't spell ulterior motive, then nothing did. That slight feeling of guilt didn't last. Not long after setting down her shirt on the kitchen counter did the long earlobe girl unbutton her shorts and began pulling them down. Her hips shook quite provocatively before she finally removed the clothing, revealing the undergarment that went with the BR. Of course, she took the moment to realign her pantaline with her finger to make sure everything fit correctly along her curvy bottom. At this point, Tamaki wondered whether he was watching someone preparing to cook or get in front of a webcam. He much preferred it be the former than later out of resentment reasons. The worst part is how that question was an actual concern, and it wasn't quelled when Jiru put on the apron she brought him. She looked too sassy to just be cooking, and for some reason Tamaki had an urge to give her $20. After that little show, everything else seemed pretty normal. Casually, Jiru went around the kitchen collecting ingredients and tools to cook with. Until, ugh, where's the vegetable oil? Scoffed Jiru, reaching up to open one of the kitchen's upper covers. She was too short to see into the cover but was barely tall enough for her hand to extend in to search for her desired oil. Obtaining seemed to be difficult to her, forcing her to get on her tiptoes to get a wider reach. Miraculously, she was being more bold despite how little she was dressed. She didn't even mind swaying her luscious waist as she hummed to herself, not knowing she was showing off her near bare butt to a now red-faced teen. This was basically witnessing one of his wet dreams becoming reality. Seeing her SWNGNG bottom go side to side appeared to be putting the pointy-eared teen in a hypnotic state. Nonsensical thoughts ran through his head. This may sound crazy, but I feel like that butt is purposely baiting me. It's like waving a chew toy in front of a dog. Of course you're going to want to bite into it. It's only natural that beings like certain things, and when they like something they want it. We want to hold it in our hands. We want to squeeze it to make sure it's real and that we actually achieved. And we want to have it all to ourselves. Sense was finally knocked back into him when he realized what he was saying and woke up, along with a certain other part of him waking up. Since it was obvious that only more insanity would ensue if he watched his ex cook, he quickly decided to enter the kitchen instead to help. If he was busy with his hands, then he can't get in trouble. Getting behind Jiru to reach into the cover, he grabbed the oil with ease. It was expected that she would freak out a bit, but she seemed relatively calm despite the fact that her peach behind brushed against his thighs. Their great height difference was lucky for him, or else she would have felt a bulking bump on her rear. She did react, giving a stern, "What are you doing?" "Just helping out. It sounded like you were having trouble in here," Tamaki lied. Telling the truth had a near certain result of earning a cancel movement on him if Jiru took it to the right people, or having his face bashed in with a frying pan. I should really stop seeing her as a hyper-violence person. Pushing aside his thoughts, Tamaki handed her the oil, saying, "So, here's your cooking lubricant." A small muffled snicker echoed throughout the room. Without another word, Tamaki calmly sets down the oil before appropriately exiling himself to the darkest corner of the kitchen to sulk and hoping he dies. Unable to hold herself back any longer, the punk rock teen bursted out into laughter. Hunched over, she almost dropped to the ground from how strong she was cackling. "Cooking lubricant? Did you just say cooking lubricant? Ha ha ha, what are you planning to do? Have some food play? Bahaha, oh my god, that is priceless," she bellowed. Her joyous comment only deepened the poor teen's longing for his life to come to a short end, or at least for him to stop feeling emotions for the rest of the day. Whatever comes first. Life can surprise him for all he cares. "I regret my life, I 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 regret my life," was all the emotionally scarred Tamaki mumbled to himself. Knowing he'll be like that for quite a while, Jiru carried on with her cooking. She was going to live off this joy for at least the next hour. She needed something to bring up her mood. Nearly half an hour passed before Tamaki came out of his self-exile in the kitchen corner. Things seemed to have gone back to normal, except for of course his half-naked ex-girlfriend being his kitchen cooking with an apron on. Beside that, the dramatic escalation of events seemed to be on halt. Scanning the current condition of the kitchen helped him discover what Jiro was cooking as well, and it surprised him. Snarky as ever, Jiro wasted no time speaking as soon as she noticed him. "Oh, you're back. Only 20 or so minutes for a slip-up like that. You're getting better." Yeah, I guess. "I see you're getting better at making fried rice," he awkwardly mumbled, pointing at the frying pan. He never expected her to currently be making his favorite food. How she knew it was his favorite goes back to a date they had when she asked him why he's always eating rice, and he answered that since the effectiveness of his quirk relays off of the different variety of animals he eats, he needed some diet to complement that, but doing so will be quite expensive and time-consuming. So instead he chose rice as his main dish to eat because of how flexible the recipes for it can be. From there, rice, specifically the fried rice variant, became his new favorite food. Before that, his favorite food was onions rings and oranges. Quite ironically, considering both his regular name and hero name. The smell began filling the room and his craving for the dish grew, but he felt a bit guilty for asking. This was something she was obviously making for herself. Was that the reason she decided to make this specific dish? "Yup, you'll probably want some too, right?" Jiro asked while her focus stayed on the pan. "Why yeah, sorry for the trouble." "Whatever, I guessed you might have asked, so I chopped up a bunch of CRP in advance. I know you like." "I'm sorry, what?" Tamaki thought to himself. He looked on the table and saw all the different vegetables and meat she cut up just for the rice. It was both strange and heartwarming. He loved putting endless of condiments in his rice, but Jiro always complained about the overly mix of flavor and would pick out the things she didn't like and give it to him. Yet here she is right now willing to go through that again even though she doesn't have it. Just like many other meals they shared together, this one is going to have a familiar, comforting feel to it, one he'll deeply miss. But this moment of her being here, despite them not being together, still being able to have altercations like they use it, it made him think, maybe he doesn't have to completely lose all of this. "Thank you. It's really nothing. I've made something like this at least 100 times. And yeah, I know I failed at most of them. Don't bring it up. I wasn't, that was all you." "Ugh, yes, shut up. The rest of her sentence was lost to her blushing mumble. "Okay, hey Kyoka." That seemed to really get her attention. She had to clear her throat as she replied, "Why yeah. You're someone I care about. I hope we can still be just friends after this." The holy gate of the kingdom in the sky may have well opened from the amount of happiness that filled Tamaki at that moment. No shudder, no miswording. He said that line perfectly and he nailed it. Tension cleared. Then it all came crashing down when suddenly Jiro tackled him to the floor. Not clear, not clear," internally screamed Tamaki as his back hit the tile floor. Full panic mode had taken over. She had never acted this way before. He had an endless amount of questions. What did he say? Did he say the wrong thing? Was there ever a right thing to say? Was she going to do this regardless of what he said? Does this mean he was barking up a tree that wasn't going to budge no matter what? Is she going to keep the stove on? That's a fire hazard. Jiro the stove. Tamaki instinctually asked about it as a small test to see what she's thinking. "Shut it," hissed Jiro, whose face was still leaning against his stomach from the tackle. Without looking, she extended her earphone jack to slap the stove knob, turning it off. At least that was one issue solved. Now only Jiro's actions need to be explained. Tamaki would ask questions, but he was already told to hold his tongue, and he wasn't one to push buttons at this point. "You idiot," softly spat the purple-haired girl. Tamaki's shirt was strained and crumbled in her firmly gripped palms. "Asking me if we can still be friends like some sad mope begging to compromise in hopes of keeping something he's about to lose. Why the hell are you the one saying it? You're the one who broke up with me." There it was, the real reason revolving around their breakup. The truth is never as one expects it. Nothing will ever change that, regardless of how bizarre, nonsensical, convenient, or unbelievable it can be at times. And I still don't get why. You were the one who asked me out first. Doesn't that mean you found me at least dateable? You never objected to holding hands no matter how anxious you were about it, so you were fine with touching me, even if we were in public. We spent a multitude of nights in each other's embrace, and you seemed to enjoy playing with my hair regardless of how much it ruffled my hair, so you could stand being around me. Her passionate recollection of their relationship was felt like a moonlight walk down memory lane, both merry but gut-wrenching. "And when we embrace," Jiro continued, taking a moment to have one of her fingers trace along the width of her lips, "I may have been the one who pushed for and initiated our first embrace, but you always returned the same feverish infatuation I did whenever our lips connected." If Tamaki remembered, it was their 6th date that they shared their first embrace. Was it one of my flaws? I can't help it if I'm not tall or big-breasted, but I still try by keeping my body in shape. If it's my attitude, then. I know I can be a beach at times, but I say I've been doing well in controlling my rougher reactions to things. If it was about those nights we spent together, we both were inexperienced during it. I even went as far to learn how to properly cook to be a more supportive partner. So why? I don't get why it was so sudden, as if there was secretly some huge issue along. I tried not to let it bother me, but the thought always lingered in my mind. Revealing her tearful face, deep sorrow filled the weeping girl's throat as she asked, "What did I do wrong?" "Absolutely nothing," Tamaki replied. Astonished hearing this, Jiro was left almost speechless. This wasn't the response she expected. With a face that made it obvious she wanted to know if she heard him correctly, she said, "Come again." Taking a deep breath, Tamaki repeated his statement. "I didn't break up with you because you did something wrong. You were an amazing girlfriend. The best one I've had, so don't blame yourself." Confused as ever, Jiro still couldn't understand what was happening. She heard his words, but it didn't clear the situation any better. But wait boo what? She needed to hear the full truth. "It's not you, it's me. I'm the one who had an issue with myself." The streams down Jiru's eyes seemed to stop as she only stared at him, anticipating the rest of the story. "You were always working so strong to constantly improve yourself to be a better girlfriend, and I'm the one with extremely high expectations on me that I can't seem to reach no matter how strong I tried. I just felt like I didn't deserve you for that. Physically I can change to whatever I want, but mentally I always end up with the same mindset. I always overthink my actions, and it grew into a fear. A fear that one day my incompetence as a person, hero, or boyfriend might end in you getting hurt in a way where you won't recover from. You're a great person, and I felt like you deserved better than me, someone who can actually improve themselves without falling back in the same hole again and again. So I thought, maybe cutting it might help give you a push. Guess I overthought that as well." Tamaki felt gut-wretched. His precautionary actions ended up causing more harm than he expected. He only wanted her to be free to actually see better things, not completely demoralize her self-confidence. Another failure. It hurt to see her appealing face weep such painful tears. He couldn't face her anymore. He lost that right and many more with what he did. Ironic enough, even under those sorrowful tears she still looked angelic. That commitment, like many other commitments Tamaki had, didn't last for long, as he felt something was jacked into his ear, and shook his head. Aye. The elf-ear boy's head quickly snapped back to his former lover. After his cracked voice shriek, he knew exactly what she did to him. "Why, you promised to stop shoving your earphone jacks into my ear after the dog ear incident. You're an idiot." I know, I've already been. You think I cared about that? That you had flaws that are strong to get over like everyone else in the whole wide world. Let me tell you something. First off, you're a good person. No one ever have something bad to say about you. Minus comment saying you stare at people like you just committed murder and is praying that no one finds the body, or ask where were you the night before. But most people got used to it after a few weeks. Second, you're an amazing hero, with no one questioning you about your position in the Big Three, and your achievements in the raid on the Yakuza have anything to say about it. You easily have the potential to move past your insecurities. Third, I'm a hero too. I can protect myself if a physical situation comes to endanger me, and if I can't do it myself, I also have friends. I ain't no helpless damsel, you idiot. Yeah, but finally, if you were such a bad boyfriend, you think I wouldn't say anything about it? I'm not a lovesick puppy willing to cling to anyone who show me a bit of attention. I stay with you because I truly her face began blushing red. I truly care about you and enjoy your presence. Don't ever get that twisted for something so you guilt trip yourself. Stop self-inserting your own high expectation on other people. My expectations of you are mine and mine alone. If I have a real issue with you, I'll tell you, and if you're having issues, then we can work on it together. That's part of the point of a relationship, improving together. Not this self-sacrificing seat as if you're about to save the world. What is this, some shitty teen drama? She had a point. He had been a bit too strong on himself. He always had high expectations put on him because of his quirk that he ended up mentally thinking everyone wanted the most from him all the time. Such a self-destructive mindset is easy to fall into, and he almost ruined something he cared about over it. Placing his hands on the side of her face, he used his thumbs to wipe away her tears before stating, "You're right, I'm sorry for being stupid." Her expression seemed to look like it got aggravated, but her eyes told how that made her feel a bit better. Scoffing, she mumbled, So what? What good does that do us now?" Embrace. Before she finished her sentence, Tamaki made quite the bold move of pulling her in for an embrace. Jiro definitely didn't expect it, but she made no effort in resisting it even after her mind registered what was happening. Like before, they shared an equal amount of passion with this embrace. Jiro began cupping Tamaki's face as well to pull him closer into the lip lock. They stayed like that for a full minute before the revelation of their current relationship status crossed the punk rock student's mind, causing her to instantly pull away, blushing a harder shade of red than before as she looked down at him. "I want to do it better now," Tamaki told her. What do you mean by that? Specify." Her mind seemed to be in another place at the moment, most likely the gutter. Giving her an extremely rare smile, he answered her question, as in, "If you'll have me, let's start over. With our relationship." "You idiot, you have the worst timing. A sudden awkward embrace on the kitchen floor is just weird," she says, even though they were only on the ground because of her and the fact that she was still on top of him. "Beside, we don't need to start over. Let's just pick up where we left off, okay?" She continued. She was rubbing her awkwardly as she looked away. She was not used to this, specifically what some may ask. The answer is everything. Luckily, the response she got made things easier. "That works for me." "Good, now then, there's something I've been wanting to do for a while. You owe me that much with that CRP you pulled on me." Without another word being shared between the two, Tamaki had an idea of what she was thinking. The feeling was mutual. Thud went the door to Tamaki's room as the pair entered, making out once again. They basically crashed onto the bed. They indulged themselves with each other. They've both been missing this for quite some time, with the thirst that can only come from walking through a desert with no water. They were drinking their longing to their body content. And then some. Jiro could feel the soft fabric of Tamaki's bedsheet against her back while his massive body weight was on her chest. There was a fresh scent she was smelling from the bedsheet that combined with her now reinstated boyfriend's fragrance that made her mind go crazy. So distracted was her mind that she didn't notice when her apron, the only thing that kept her from being in only her undergarments, was tossed off to the side. She wasn't even sure who it was that did it. It was overwhelming, but in a good kind of way, the kind that really gets her motors running, the kind that makes her slip her hands under his shirt to feel his well-built muscles. Almost like an act to have them both be low on clothing, she pulled his shirt off of him, having it join the other article of clothing on the floor. The action did cause them to break from the embrace for a moment, which gave the pair a chance to properly look at each other. Tamaki saw the small but slender, gorgeous figure of Jiro. Her body language showed signs of her trying to cover up parts of her body, as if she's still slightly ashamed she couldn't be as well endowed like some of her other classmates. She was absolutely adorable when she acted this docile. Jiro got to look up at the hunky body of Tamaki. Months of physical training and hero experience reflected perfectly on his frame. Every tiny scar or mark that appeared on his chest only made her find him so appealing. He's such a strong worker despite what he might think at times. She had a feeling of what he wanted to do when Jiro saw his uncertain eyes. He can be cute as well when his shyness surfaces. Grabbing one of his wrists, she let his hand till his fingertips connected the smooth surface of her BR. "You're such a baby, you know that," she teased with a smile on her face. "I'm half naked on your bed, yet you always choose this to get cold feet. It's like I'm leading a scaredy cat through a haunted house." The comment sparked a shade of pink to come across his face. He mumbled apologetically, "Sorry." "It's okay," she tells him. "I know you'll improve one day. Besides, I don't mind getting you started like this." With her pulling his hand in close, Tamaki felt a palm full of Jiru's soft chest beyond the BR. They spent NT&T time together as Jiro led him with ways to massage her breast, till an occasion occurred with Tamaki squeezing his hand around the fluffy pad he was feeling, causing Jiro to let out a moan. Almost wanting to take it back, Tamaki apologized again and was about to pull away, but Jiru's grip stopped him. "No, I told you before that moaning. I'll like that. Means I like it." Nodding his head, Tamaki began incorporating more squeezes into their play. The irony was how the situation was unfolding. Usually when they're training or something, Tamaki was the one instructing Jiro on how to do things. Now he was the student while she teaches. It was just like his girlfriend said, part of a relationship is growing together. He's always a slow starter, but once he gets started, he can get into anything. With his confidence and moral high, he leaned over to embrace the moaning girl's neck, making the noise she was making grow louder. Moving in closer, his free hand was moving lower, gripping the bottom part of her delicate leg, and slowly moving back and forth her tender leg. He eventually gained enough confidence to slip his hand under the pretty BR itself for the real prize. Her bare breast was by far more enchanting. Every inch of her felt silky smooth. She was loving every minute of it. 3 different sensitive places of her were all being pleasured at the same time. All-encompassing feeling given to her by someone so close to her heart. What could feel better than that on a daily basis? Just from this alone, she feels her loins almost hitting a break point. Despite her feelings to him, that would be too embarrassing for her to bear. She needed to stall time for a bit, stopping him by squirming a bit to create enough of an opening for her knee to separate them. She says in a low voice, I want to try something." Obeying her, Tamaki relieved some of his weight off Jiro, much to her displeasure. Whatever she had planned must have really been strong to say, as she only gave direction through body movement. She pushed against his shoulder to signal him to light up against her more and also to turn around before shoving his chest back down to get him down on the bed. With his back now on the bed, she quickly scurried to an appropriate position by his breathe, silently gulping before unbuckling them. Almost immediately, Tamaki opened his mouth once he caught on to what she was thinking. He was as embarrassed about it as she was, but his attempt was stopped by her earphone jack coming upon his lips. "No objections, just trust me on this one," she assured him. She can live with herself if they're both embarrassed about the same thing. First came the breathe and then his boxer, leaving only his irked shrine standing tall on his body. Intimidation began to weigh on the punk rock girl the more she stared at it. Tamaki bulky CCK looked like it was going to be one of the toughest challenges she'll face in her life. Cautiously, her hand approached it as if she might awaken some beast if she moved too fast. Carefully, she clasped the pulsing beast in front of her. This wasn't the first time she did this, but it never stopped amazing her, feeling how strong his PP pulsed when it was in her hands. If she didn't know better, she would have assumed that was his heartbeat. Drawing her face in closer, the elf-eared boy felt her hot breath brushing against his CCK. She only stopped to establish one last thing. "I swear if you tell anyone I did this, especially that blue-haired chatterbox, I will shove my jack so far down your ear that you'll have tinnitus for a year," she threatened with one of her earphone jacks hovering in front of Tamaki's line of sight. Swallowing strong, Tamaki knew he had nothing to worry about. He never bragged about his relationships to anyone. At most, he'll only talk to someone for advice on something than an actual discussion with what goes on between them. He thinks her threat have to do more with her slight random jealousy she has toward his friend Nejire. Though they're purely platonic friends, he guessed the thought that a older, bustier, more popular, lovable airhead girl is so close to her boyfriend all the time. He never got why girls can be so competitive. With her strange request guaranteed to be kept, she proceeded with her lewd actions. Planting a timid embrace on the tip of his staff, earning a wince from the raven-haired boy. To him, tiny little touches like those is comparable to tickling his most sensitive area with a feather. Thankfully, he didn't have to worry about withstanding too many of that. That single embrace turned the lavender-haired girl face completely red. Taking time to mentally recuperate from her RTC action, she kept her lover busy and stimulated by stroking his CCK. First going at an almost teasing pace before quickly picking the speed. Her constant fondle up and down the length was satisfying Tamaki based on the groans he let out his mouth. He always teased her about how loud she moans, but he was quite a screamer himself with the right amount of pleasure to feed his arsehole. To reach that, she needed to do more than work her arm, slowing down the pace she built up. Closing her eyes, she without warning engulfed the head of Tamaki's CCK into her mouth. Tamaki had to cover his mouth to muffle down his groan. It was another thing he felt embarrassed about doing, especially after an occasion when one of Jiru's roommate had a comment the next day asked why Jiro was sleeping with some muscular chick. Jiro held her position for a moment, letting the head warm up from the burning heat inside her mouth. Anticipation was always Tamaki's weakness in bed. The first minute he used all he had to not move, the second minute he needed to grip onto the bed sheets to control himself, the third minute one of his legs started squirming, and the next 2 minutes left his body begging for more. His breathing became so heavy it sounded like he might crack at any minute, which signaled to her that he had enough. She wanted him to groan, not just squirm. Squirming was icing on a completed cake. Taking her time to not rush things because she was still a bit inexperienced with this as well, Jiro began to tug on his DCK with her mouth, SCK on the head. Each suckle brought a wave of pleasure to the boy, and every groan he gave encouraged Jiro to do more. Slowly she began working her way down his, breaking every couple of centimeters to properly blow the piece of his CCK that was already in her mouth. Every inch of the boy's manhood was going to be pleasured with intensive care through her mouth, a caring oral massage. As she got near the base, it became more difficult to fit in more of him past her jaw. It was a miracle she didn't trigger her GG reflex yet or accidentally make a chomp of a lifetime. But she already committed herself to getting every bit in, even if it felt like having an entire roll of salami shoved in her mouth. The only difference was that she didn't like the taste of salami. Not that she'll ever admit what that implies vocally, that might actually kill her. She was so close to her goal as well, only another half-inch to go. Building up the will, she made one last push forward with her head and managed to slide in the last bit of irked flesh. Congrats, your mouth is now literally filled with meat, Jiro told herself. If you had asked if this was where she saw herself when she first started hero school, she would have gone beyond giving you tinnitus, and straight up would have made you deaf. She couldn't move as she was afraid if she did, then taking the entire thing again would be too strong. She had to let her jaw adjust a bit to the size before she moved. It became strong to do the proper mouth movements to SCK. Her saliva was dripping down to Tamaki's pelvis. She made quite the mess on his lap. With the weight, all she would do was sigh, a nonchalant action that had an interesting effect. Cause when she did it, it made her throat vibrate against the already sensitive piece of Tamaki inside of her, causing him to let out a surprised groan. Getting an idea, Jiro became pleasuring him with one of her best aspects, her voice. Luckily, a lifelong interest in singing has made her vocals magical. Before, Tamaki only experienced the magic through sound. Now he was going to experience it through touch. But she wasn't going to do some random words. No, she was going to confess a lot of things while they're in this position, giving her the personal relief of getting things off her chest. So she confessed. She spoke about certain things she would never have the courage to say if she knew someone could actually hear what she said, and didn't process it as BLWJB gurgling noise. The entire time the vibrations continued in her throat, encasing Tamaki's member in a tunnel that was slobbery wet, warm, and had walls that can quiver. His CCK was getting a 5-star massage. If there was any restraint Tamaki had with his groans, they were gone now. No willpower he had could hold back the endless waves of groan that escaped his lips. The overwhelming pleasure of the head he was getting was too much. The poor teen didn't even know this was only the intermission. Soon Jiru's jaw adapted to the stretch and strain it was dealing with, which meant one thing: it was go time. She stopped the tearing in her throat abruptly and quickly began retracting her mouth off the soaking wet, leading her boyfriend into a false sense of security. He was thankful it was apparently over, with no knowledge of what's to come next. Right as he thought his crotch would be completely free, Jiro crashed her face bow down, taking the entire thing back in again and gagging a bit. They both became very thankful that Tamaki's parents weren't home, cause there was no one they wouldn't hear anything that was going on in that room after that stunt. Pleased with getting her wish, Jiro decided to get back to the more passionate side of things, bobbing her head up and down the length of his CCK over and over again. Thanks to her little time-wasting method, it was much easier for her to receive the girthy CCK, enabling her to take in most of it without needing to stop. Already weak from the SDMLTN it's been enduring for the last couple of minutes, something from within Tamaki's crotch became rumbling. All the pleasure he had been receiving built pressure that's been rising in intensity every minute, and it was ready to burst. Not stopping, she continued SCK on his, grabbing onto her lover's hips to keep him steady. His CCK entering and exiting her mouth at rapid speed. The teen's groans started to get loud again just as the rumbling inside of her mouth increased. Finally, the long-awaited CLMX happened with loads of cum suddenly bursting into the punk girl's mouth. There was an attempt to swallow it all to be more RTC, but the poor inexperienced Jiro couldn't even come close, immediately pulling off of Tamaki's crotch, letting to spray its essence freely into the world. Luckily or unluckily depending on how one sees it, most of it landed on Jiru's face and cessed because of her position of being right in front of it, leaving multiple strands of steaming cum to lay along her body. A breeze. Tamaki lifted his back from the bed so he could look down at the person who performed such an enjoyable but fully exhausting act on him. Jiro didn't speak for a moment, keeping her mouth shut as if she was stopping herself from speaking. Every second her face seemed to turn more and more bitter until finally she popped open her mouth, letting a sluggish mixture rolling off her tongue into the palm of her hands. "Bleh," she exclaimed with her tongue still sticking out, letting a thin line of saliva trickle down off it and connect to the remaining pool of cum she couldn't swallow. "I'm sorry, I don't know how others do it, but I don't think I can ever get used to doing that. Too salty." When she finally looked back up at him with her sparkling onyx eyes, it was unbelievable to Tamaki that his secretly self-coined sis and sequely timid petite girlfriend could unintentionally make an extremely lewd but cute look. He always knew she didn't need big assets to be sussy. Time went by as Jiro was now exiting the bathroom after cleaning up her body and washing out the remaining taste of cum in her mouth. "My tongue still feels like I ate a spoon of chicken seasoning," commented Jiro as she entered the bedroom, seeing Tamaki still sitting on the bed without his cloths. "Though I guess it's not that bad if you enjoyed it that much." Snapping his head up and shooting up to his feet, Tamaki replied, "You were doing way too much. I thought I was going to die at one point." "You were fine, those weren't the sounds you make when you're about to die." "Die of embarrassment. I pray my neighbors didn't hear me or else they'll think we're filming some kind of weird porno. At least it'll be a moment we'll both be embarrassed about. If I'm being honest, I sorta only did that because I didn't want to see LMX just from FR Ply." "You what? I know what you're thinking. So mean." "Okay, what's more embarrassing? Groaning loudly because someone was getting a BLWJB or CLMX from soft FR Ply? You're really something else, you know." Yeah, I just wanted to save my own for something more." She mumbled the last part. She was reverting back to her shy self. It must have been something sequely because of how red her face was getting again. Grabbing the string of her panty and tugging on it, manages to ask, "So if you're up to it, I wanna do it right now." Slowly putting together the hints, Tamaki stared back at her. Just like that, the two were back on the bed in the same position they were in when they first entered together, embrace, tongue, hands exploring each other. The only difference was now they had thrown away their last piece of clothing into the pile of discarded clothes. They could have done this all day, but that wasn't why they were there. They wanted to make love to each other. During their NTMT embrace, they had slapped on a functional condom, gearing his ready to go at their leisure. Breaking their embrace one more time, the two stared, another looked. Jiro, still being shy, nodded to give the signal, allowing Tamaki to properly get in position. As he prepared, the punk rock girl had a moment to herself to breathe in the fresh scent of the bedsheets. They must have just been washed. "I feel bad for what's about to happen on them now. They're not going to be so clean afterwards." With his tip now grinding against the petite girl's entrance, the couple interlocked their fingers, bracing each other for what's to come next. With a single move, he penetrated her. Dual mons from both sides were heard. They took a brief moment before anything else. They were not connected both emotionally and physically now. Shoving his CCK deeper through the tight inner walls of Jiru's, Tamaki would pull back whenever it felt like he struck a barrier before move back in, continuing the cycle till most of his length could be inserted into her cunt without pause. Each move carried more force with it than the last, expanding her insides, and making a sloppy wet lewd noise whenever their pelvis collided. Drooling already from the sensation of feeling his DCK repeatedly inserting into her, Jiro tried to hide it by biting her thumb, but that couldn't stop the mons leaking through her gritted teeth. This was a much better experience, both sexually and physically. Before, it used to hurt a lot more and their movement were more rigged and stiff. Now that most of the entail pain was gone, she could spend more time enjoying the good feeling she got from sec, combined with the continuous engaging flow they had going on, and this was breaking its way into their best sex session yet. She spread out her legs wide before wrapping them around his waist to give Tamaki a better angle to enter deeper inside of her. Sweat dripped off the brawny physique of Tamaki as he continued to fornicate with his lover. His hips were on fire. There was a burning sensation building in his lower abdomen. He didn't want to slow down, so he continued to buck his hips, slamming his CCK constantly against the lavender hair girl's delicate but wanting. Her mons were getting more RTC the longer they went on, at first being soft exhale before evolving into loud passionate cries. They invigorated him to keep going. grabbing her waist to pull her body down in synchronization of him ramming inside of her, creating a divine feeling of RSNG satisfaction that appeased there. Every collision echoed the tingling feeling they felt in their loins throughout their entire body. Both of them were loudly expressing their passionate into the air and drenched nearly head to toe in sweat from the intensity of their lovemaking. The bed was shaking uncontrollably as they bounced off the mattress endlessly, creaking the bed frame so strong that if the teens' minds weren't so focused on each other they would have thought the bed might break at any time. They were hitting their limit and fast. Thanks to the condom they used, there wasn't a concern about accidental impregnation. They didn't need to stop, meaning they can get as wild as they want. Words weren't said, they both knew what the other was thinking based on their faces. Instead, they shared one last passionate embrace with each other as a twin combination of two different kinds of organism exploded where they were sexually connected, leaving the couple both physically and mentally exhausted, cuddling with another as they lay together on bedsheets that are soaked in the wet moisture of their own sec. The room was silent for a while before a voice broke it. I love you. I love you too. A fatigue embrace was shared. After a quick uneventful shower that was clearly eventful with a makeout session, the pair dressed up to stop by the kitchen in order to grab themselves each bowl of fried rice before settling back down in the living room. Luckily it hasn't cooled down from the long wait. With Tamaki resting comfortably on the couch and Jiro seating herself on his lap like before, they enjoyed a delicious meal as they watched TV. As usual, it was basically Jiro watching whatever niche show she liked while Tamaki played with Jiro's gorgeous hair that now had a new scent thanks to the shower they had. But unlike before, they were more chatty and physical with their actions. Jiro's backside seemed to be leaning further back on Tamaki's lap when before she would always make sure there was some distance between the two. Now she could fully rest her back against the firm surface that was Tamaki's chest. Tamaki, on the other hand, was more relaxed with his body. His hand no longer recited itself to only playing with and sniffing with Jiro's lavender hair. It became exploring other parts of her body as well. Seriously, is there anything we can do with the salty thing? Jiro asked. I heard pineapples sweeten it a bit, Tamaki suggested. Why do you know that? I do. You're quite the pervert, aren't you? No, I'm not. If anyone here was being pervy, it was you. Why did I come into the kitchen to see you cooking in your underwear? Well, let's just say in my lightly irrational mindset at the time, I thought I could gain someone's interest again if I put on a little show. What? PFFFD. Hey, don't laugh. It worked, didn't it, considering how long it took you to come out of your hiding stop and help me? How did you know? Earphone jacks, you know my quirk. It's really good at hearing things, especially the heartbeat of a secret admirer who was being too much of an idiot to be honest. Oh God, please don't remind me of how stupid I was being. I don't know what I was thinking. It's fine, you were trying to be selfless for my sake, so I guess I can forgive you for it. Just never do it again, okay? Okay. Kaioka, I love you. Geez, what's with that all of a sudden? I heard you the first time. I know. I love you too, Tamaki. Sometimes life never goes the way you're expecting, but that doesn't always spell misfortune. That was a lesson Amajiki Tamaki learned today. In the wake of the sudden pandemic, society panicked. Bunkering down before the stay-at-home orders were rendered effective immediately. Those that dared venture out of their houses focused on gathering as many supplies as they could in case of an emergency. Store stocks were depleted in an instant, closing house prematurely as the food, drink, and necessity stock plummeted in Musutafu. UA, of course, was exempt from this. With a private contract to various shipping companies that directly imported goods to their doorstep, they remained well-stocked and prepared for the duration of the entire pandemic. The dorms were always filled with whatever a student needed to barely eke out boring days in quarantine. After all, they had everything the outside world was scrambling to get their hands on. So why the flippity-floppity flying FCK did class wanna keep asking for more DMN cleaning supplies? It was late at night when the individual in an obscuring trench coat and an electric voice modulator sneaks out of the dorm building and off of the campus grounds. They carry a large backpack on them as they walk straight past the security cameras, making sure to stick to the few blind spots and shadows that obscure them. Once they're out, it's a cakewalk from there. They roam the empty streets, not even criminals willing to leave the sanctity of their homes and risking infection. A common cough mask hides the bottom half of their mask, and they've hidden their top half with sunglasses and a beanie. A small part of them laments as how cheesy and shady they must look like. They're interrupted by another individual slinking down the streets in a cough mask and a dark blue hoodie. The two of them pause at a corner under a streetlight, very conspicuously. The hooded individual glances over at the trenchcoat-wearing fellow and asks in a tired but eager voice, "You got the merchandise?" The trenchcoat-wearing individual looks back. "You got the money." Fluid as water, the individual's customer easily pulls a fat wad of cash out of their pocket and hands it to the dealer. The dealer takes his time counting the bills and nods. A roll of 40,000 yen and 5,000 yen bills fit snugly in his hand. Slipping the cash away, the dealer sets their backpack down and opens it. Inside are bottles of shampoo, body wash, hand sanitizer and rolls of toilet paper neatly stuffed into the massive but light backpack. The dealer grabs 4 of the 10 unwrapped rolls, and 2 bottles of each cleaning product and hands them off to the customer, who immediately stores them away in an empty duffel bag they've kept under their hoodie. Get out of here. You never saw me, the dealer commands as he zips up the backpack. With a single nod, the two part ways as they head back to their respective locations. The empty streets remain quiet, with only the soft chirping of crickets to lull everyone to a sleep. God damn it, who stole all the toilet paper again? One of the dealer's classmates shrieked from the bathroom, barging through the door with a hateful blaze in their eyes. The whole roll is gone. Not only that, all the backup rolls in the closet are gone, too. We don't even have the cardboard rolls here. The dealer stifles a chuckle as they leave the room. All according to plan. I guess we'll have to call Aizawa-sensei again. Tell him we need more cleaning supplies. The dealer replies, shaking his head in fake exasperation. Seriously though, who keeps stealing all this stuff? It isn't like they were hoarding it or anything. We didn't find anything when we searched the room at all. Their classmate shrugs with a similarly annoyed look. I dunno, but the good thing is, Mint is the designated Aizawa informer now. Hopefully, Aizawa is PSS enough to take it out on the little rat. They reply in turn, and the dealer nods sagely. With quarantine confining them all to the dorms, Minta's perverted actions was at an all-time high, to the point where the girls refused to go anywhere near the pervert nowadays. Even the guys were beginning to get sick and tired of Minta's bullshit. Hopefully it'll at least get him kicked down to general education, at the very least. The dealer grumbles as they walk with their classmate. The smell of pancakes and syrup tickle their nostrils, and they perk up. Is breakfast already ready? I thought it would be a while longer before Sadhu finished cooking anything with how much he's been sleeping in. Oh, Sadhu woke up extra early today. Couldn't go to sleep after he left his bed to blow his nose, so he just decided to freshen up and make an early breakfast. Once they reached the first floor, the dealer's classmate yelled at the top of their lungs, "Hey guys, toilet paper's gone again." Minta, you know the drill by then, get going. There was a worthlessly cowardly whine from the purple midget, who defeatedly trudged over to the phone, already dialing the number in. The majority of the class, however, groaned in frustration and annoyance, some of them even cursing out loud. As if to reassure them, the dealer shrugged. Did they take anything else, or was it just the toilet paper this time? They asked, already knowing the answer. They'd had to keep their thefts to a random pattern to throw the others off just in case. Yeah, 2 of the full shampoo and body wash bottles are gone, and the hand sanitizer's gone. The good kinds, too. Yet another collective groan from the others. The dealer could sympathize with them. The good kinds of shampoo were scented with deliciously fruity smells, and the body wash helped act as a skin moisturizer as well. At least we have the shampoo stash untouched, so there's that. Whoever the thief is, they must understand that this is a time of quarantine. Ida exclaimed, his arms windmilling fiercely as he shouted, "We must conserve supplies as much as we can, and sooner or later, you will be caught. Either cease your actions now, or deal with the consequences when you are caught." If anything, everyone wore a deadpan look on their faces. Ida, did they real think that would work? The dealer deadpanned, and their class president slumped in defeat. And no, but I truly wanted to get it out of my system. Ada replied. Despite that, he immediately snapped back to his former state of mind and chopped his arms. Now then, why don't we all get something to eat? Here's to one more day closer to the end of the quarantine. The class cheered up at the thought, whooping as they grabbed food in a jovial mood and animatedly chatted away with each other. The dealer sighed and ran a hand through their hair, before joining the rest of their class. Out of the corner of their eye, they saw Minta looked paler and paler as he spoke to Aizawa into the phone. Evidently, Aizawa must have been losing his patience, putting Minta, who constantly contacted him, this much closer to getting into huge trouble. The dealer hid a malevolent smirk. All according to plan. They perked up as they checked their phone. Another buyer wanted 3 bottles of shampoo and 2 loofahs for 30,000 yen. Well, it wasn't like the others couldn't get more supplies from the school, right? They tapped a reply and hit send once they were done, slipping their phone into their pocket. The next day, 3 girls shrieked at the loss of some perfectly good pomegranate-scented shampoo and 3 new loofahs, unopened. Of their rooms, the one the Baka squad hung out in most was Shiro's, because he had a hammock. Of course it wasn't as fun when Bakugo only let Jiro and sometimes Shiro into Shiro's hammock. This was one such lucky time for Shiro to hang out in his own hammock. But that left Kirishima, Kaminari, and Mina sad and bored. Okay, the boredom wasn't because they weren't in the hammock, but that didn't help. If they were in the hammock they could at least swing, but no, Bakugo only let Jiro and Shiro in, and those 2 were content to try and catch some Z's. Honestly, Shiro had been taking naps en masse, so there was no reason for him to try and take a third that day. Bakugo was playing Animal Crossing in the hammock, Jiro dozing on his cest, and his legs tangled with Shiro, grumbling every so often about ugly villagers messing up his town. Kaminari probably would play with him, being the only other Baka squad member with the SWCH, except for the fact that he had forgotten his SWCH in his room, and by then he had already rested his head on Mina's thighs and laid down in Shiro's bed, which while not the hammock was still incredibly comfy. Kirishima was spread-eagled on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. Every so often he would raise his hand up to poke at Bakugu's arm, narrowly avoiding Bakugu's swng down to try and bite his finger while still staring at his screen. Kirishima and Kaminari had both been content to stare at the ceiling and dissociate. Zero's room was so pretty. How did he get the walls to be that copper Y color? Was it the cool but light he had somehow managed to put in his room? Oh my gosh, he installed it himself, didn't he? Zero was so cool and talented and hardworking. They really didn't appreciate him enough, did they? How did he know what exactly would look best in the room and where it should be placed? Did he have to send back stuff? Oh, imagine what his room at home looked like. What scent is this incense? It's really good and strong but soft and quiet, but also. Mina had tried to get the others to do something. God, anything. But they just hadn't. She'd ended up sitting up on Zero's bed with Kaminari's head in her lap, on her phone. It took about 30 minutes before Mina ended up bursting. Hey guys, let me guess your BLD types. She exclaimed this with the intensity of 3 very prominent exclamation marks at the end of her sentence. It got the desired effect of their attention. Kirishima sat straight up so fast that he didn't stop and ended up hitting his head on the floor because he kept going forward. Kaminari zapped her a little bit, which, frankly, she was used to by this point. Jiro, who had been half asleep, jolted awake and her earphone jacks extended down into the floor so fast it looked a little painful. What was more painful but also hilarious was her immediately bringing her jacks back up and saying, "I did not need to hear that." Zero meanwhile just snorted awake. The funniest one was of course Bakugu, who kicked his leg out and screamed, "FCK off." "Oh, RBLD types. Sure, go for it, dude. Good save, Kirishima. Good save. I'm not FC King stopping you, but if you yell like that for no goddamn FC King reason again, I'll rip your tongue out and shove it so far up your butt it'll be back where it's supposed to be and not work. Everyone was silent after that descriptive threat. Zero looked a little scared to be in the hammock with Bakugu now. Mina wouldn't be deterred, however. "Okay, so Kaminari." "Yes, ma'am." Still laying down, he brought his hand up to salute her. "Okay, you're energetic. You're friendly and outgoing. You're really spontaneous and kinda irresponsible. Hey, hush, and you're fun and happy and nice. You're totally type B." Mina said this with confidence and a smirk on her face. "Nah, I'm type O, yo." Verbal gasp. That rhymed. While Kaminari marveled at his rhyming skills, Mina's jaw dropped. "What? No way." "Yes way. But you were right about all those other things." Mina still pouted, and turned to look at Kirishima. "Okay, well, Kiri, you're all those things. You're definitely type B. You just gotta be." She smiled widely, but that smile dimmed just slightly when Kirishima gave her a sheepish smile back. Well, actually I'm type O as well." "Oh come on." "Haha, oh come on you mean." Denki, I swear to God, but she didn't finish. Because she had to focus. Did she not know her friends as well as she thought, or did the BLD type thing just not apply for them? Oh well, 2 out of 5 wrong isn't so bad. That's a math number that I sent 0. Okay well, Zero, you're a little more toned down than these dudes, but I would still pin you for a type B, but since I've been wrong about that with these guys, I'll just say you're type O. Actually, I am type B. WHAAT. Score. 1 point for Mina Ishido. Except you said type O, Jiro pointed out. Only because. Getting too loud in here. Bakugu was glaring menacingly at his SWCH and everyone quieted down for a collective 30 seconds before Mina started back up again. Okay well, let's do you next, Jiro, since my confidence is back, which means I can never be wrong again. I'm pinning you for type AB. You're super creative and talented, but you're also very calm and rational and smart. Mina smiled at Jiro like she had smiled at Kirishima, and Jiro gave her back a small appreciative smile, and then said, "You're half right, I'm type A." "What?" Ishido yelled before immediately quieting down and staring at Bakugu. Luckily seemed very focused on whatever he was doing in Animal Crossing now. "Okay fine, you're type A. I mean I guess it kinda makes sense if you squint at it while upside down." Bakugu simply gave a grunt which said, "This is stupid, you're stupid." And were I not completely focused on creating this cute butt dress in Animal Crossing, I would tell you very loudly and very angrily how much I do not care. But if it'll make you happy, fine. It was a very expressive grunt, so long as you spoke, Bakugu. You're confident, determined, ambitious, strong, competitive, brilliant, strategic, organized, decisive, honest, responsible, logical, arrogant, aggressive, ruthless, and a big DCK. I didn't know you knew half those words, so I'm gonna say you're type B. Nope. He drew out a N and popped the P in a deadpan, and with that rejection Mina had her confidence boosted again. Really? So you actually are type O then? No, type A. What? That makes almost less sense than you being type B. Do I look like I care? You. Mina pouted and crossed her arms. By now Kaminari had decided to sit up next to her and he looked curiously at her. Wait, so then what are you, Mina? I think we'd all pretty much say type B honestly. Shows what y'all know, I'm type AB. Jiro interjected, "Well now wait a minute, you said that type AB is supposed to be calm, rational, and smart." "Well yeah, but like, I'm still super creative and talented. And I'm popular and sociable and I love fun and I'm super spontaneous. It does actually make sense, but type AB is supposed to be a mixture of A and B. You've pretty much got B down, but not a lot of the A0 added in his 2 cents. Well, I'm empathetic like an A. Besides, yours kind makes sense too. Ish. Oh yeah, try us. Jiro challenged. WL. You Jiro are more empathetic than you realize. You got through to Kuda that one time and your music reaches everyone's hearts. And of course you're very calm and you're very responsible. Also, you're a bit more reserved than a lot of other people, and okay, don't bite my head off for this, but you're also a lot more cautious than some people. Like, you weren't completely on board with the band at first because you were nervous. And type A's usually have some sort of inner turmoil and anxiety. Mina finished her rant with a smile. Jiro did not bite her head off. Instead, she blinked and nodded. That was. And Kaminari, even if you don't have a lot of O, you still have a lot of it. Type O's are optimistic and outgoing. They're go-getters and you certainly go get. And you've definitely got the confidence down. And a lot of type O people are really generous even though they don't always show it, and so are you. And they're really reliable and loyal, and you'll always have our backs no matter what. They're trendsetters and you love your trends. And they are devoted and carefree. There is no one more carefree in the school than you. Wow. And that goes for you too, Kiri. You're more loyal and devoted than anyone else in this school. You are super outgoing and optimistic. You believe in the best in everyone, even villains. You're so determined and so strong. You have the best will of all of us. You're athletic. And you're generous. Holy CRP, are you generous? You're so resilient and passionate. And even though you don't believe it, we all know you're a better leader than you give yourself credit for. You just gotta take charge more. Kiri had manly tears of manliness in his eyes. Thought Mina didn't notice. Mina. And Bakugo, you listen up. You are committed. You are loyal. Oh my gosh, and you're organized and you have great plans always. And you're clever. And passionate. And of course you're stubborn. Like I said earlier, you are responsible. You're a total perfectionist and obsess over getting things right. I mean, you're doing it right now with your game. And even though you won't admit it, you're sensitive. You care about how people see you and you care about us and you stress yourself out over things, but you shouldn't have to. All like type A. Bakugo looked torn between yelling about being called sensitive and anxious, or giving one of his rare real smiles at her over this. Bop. No, don't interrupt me, I'm on a roll. Mina pulled out her phone and went to her calendar. American zodiacs. I don't know these as well, but that won't stop me. Oh wow, I didn't realize how many of us were Leos. Whatever, let's do this. Jirou. You are a lioness. You are meant to be on the stage. Did you even see yourself while you were singing and rocking out during the concert? You commanded that stage like it was your beach. You were the one in charge and it was wonderful. You're so passionate. You put your heart into everything you do. And you're so honest and courageous and kind. You are so awesome. She didn't even wait this time, she just kept going. And Zero, my man, my lion, you are warm. You make people feel comforted just by your presence, just because you are so chill but at the same time so energetic. And you are passionate. And you're charismatic like I don't even have a word for it. You can charm anyone because you're so good. And you're like Jiro, you kind and brave. You're loyal and protective. You're awesome too. And Kami. Oh Kami, my sweet cancer. The crab. You are so empathetic. You understand people's emotions without needing them to tell you, you just see it and you go to make them feel better. You intuit it. And you're compassionate. And you're creative. I've seen what you write, you freaking cancer you. And like I've said, you're loyal. Oh my god, you're loyal, Kaminari. Kami, you're so great. Tiri, a Libra, scales of justice. You have so much love to give. You're overflowing with it. And you're charming. And lovable. And so sincere and fair. This is part of the reason why you're such a good hero and why you need to accept you make a good leader. You are so kind. And loyal. Loyal. Always loyal. Kirii. Mina was gasping for breath, but even that didn't stop her. And was there ever a man who more encapsulated an Aries Taurus cusp with Aries leanings than Bakugo? You are DMNT and strong. You are so full of life and passion. And you're an amazing leader and hardworking and strategic and determined and independent. Bakugo, you are so confident and smart and powerful. And you're still generous in your own Bakugo way, and we all know it. She was gasping more, and before anyone could get a word in, she was off again. This is fun. Okay, what's next? UUUH. OMBTIS and Enneagrams. Okay, UUUH. Mina, several voice tried to say. Okay, well, Bakugo is definitely an ent, or is he INTJ? Oh, Mina. And now she was startled because everyone, including Bakugo, had yelled at her. Mina, now it was just Kirishima who looked a little weepy. Mina, dude, you're so FC King awesome. And then Mina had a giant pile of muscle on her, which was succeeded by Kaminari, Zero and Jiro. We get it, you love us and you love pointing it and our good traits out with personality tests, and sit like zodiacs and BLD types. We get it. Calm down. And then Jiro was gently hugging her while also looking very pointedly at Bakugo. He stood up and sat behind and wrapped his left arm around her while he used his right to hold out what he'd been doing on his SWCH to her. She heard a whisper of, tell the rest about this and you're dead. An empty threat that Mina nonetheless followed because honestly, she was too moved by what he was showing her. It was a bright and gaudy pink dress he'd been making in Animal Crossing. Specifically a dress that seemed to be part of a series of dresses he'd made based off of them. That was so sweet and goofy that she was about to cry. We love you, Mina. And that was Kaminori. She couldn't help but start laughing as she decided to tickle her friends. This turned into war, as most things with the Baka squad turned into. While they were all a pile of flailing limbs on the floor, Bakugo watched on before turning back to his game. Stupid idiots. His idiots, though. In the wake of the sudden pandemic, society panicked. Bunkering down before the stay-at-home orders were rendered effective immediately. Those that dared venture out of their houses focused on gathering as many supplies as they could in case of an emergency. Store stocks were depleted in an instant, closing house prematurely as the food, drink, and necessity stock plummeted in Musutafu. UA, of course, was exempt from this. With a private contract to various shipping companies that directly imported goods to their doorstep, they remained well-stocked and prepared for the duration of the entire pandemic. The dorms were always filled with whatever a student needed to barely eke out boring days in quarantine. After all, they had everything the outside world was scrambling to get their hands on. So why the flippity-floppity flying FCK did Class 1 keep asking for more DMN cleaning supplies? It was late at night when the individual in an obscuring trench coat and an electric voice modulator sneaks out of the dorm building and off of the campus grounds. They carry a large backpack on them as they walk straight past the security cameras, making sure to stick to the few blind spots and shadows that obscure them. Once they're out, it's a cakewalk from there. They roam the empty streets, not even criminals willing to leave the sanctity of their homes and risking infection. A common cough mask hides the bottom half of their mask, and they've hidden their top half with sunglasses and a beanie. A small part of them laments as how cheesy and shady they must look like. They're interrupted by another individual slinking down the streets in a cough mask and a dark blue hoodie. The two of them pause at a corner under a streetlight, very conspicuously. The hooded individual glances over at the trenchcoat-wearing fellow and asks in a tired but eager voice, "You got the merchandise?" The trenchcoat-wearing individual looks back. "You got the money." Fluid as water, the individual's customer easily pulls a fat wad of cash out of their pocket and hands it to the dealer. The dealer takes his time counting the bills and nods. A roll of 40,000 yen and 5,000 yen bills fit snugly in his hand. Slipping the cash away, the dealer sets their backpack down and opens it. Inside are bottles of shampoo, body wash, hand sanitizer and rolls of toilet paper neatly stuffed into the massive but light backpack. The dealer grabs 4 of the 10 unwrapped rolls and 2 bottles of each cleaning product and hands them off to the customer, who immediately stores them away in an empty duffel bag they've kept under their hoodie. "Get out of here. You never saw me," the dealer commands as he zips up the backpack. With a single nod, the two part ways as they head back to their respective locations. The empty streets remain quiet, with only the soft chirping of crickets to lull everyone to a sleep. "God damn it, who stole all the toilet paper again?" One of the dealer's classmates shrieked from the bathroom, barging through the door with a hateful blaze in their eyes. "The whole roll is gone. Not only that, all the backup rolls in the closet are gone, too. We don't even have the cardboard rolls here." The dealer stifles a chuckle as they leave the room. "All according to plan. I guess we'll have to call Aizawa-sensei again. Tell him we need more cleaning supplies." The dealer replies, shaking his head in fake exasperation. "Seriously though, who keeps stealing all this stuff? It isn't like they were hoarding it or anything. We didn't find anything when we searched the room at all." Their classmate shrugs with a similarly annoyed look. "I dunno, but the good thing is, mine is the designated Aizawa informer now. Hopefully, Aizawa is PSS enough to take it out on the little rat." They reply in turn, and the dealer nods sagely. With quarantine confining them all to the dorms, Minda's perverted actions was at an all-time high, to the point where the girls refused to go anywhere near the pervert nowadays. Even the guys were beginning to get sick and tired of Minda's bullshit. Hopefully it'll at least get him kicked down to general education, at the very least. The dealer grumbles as they walk with their classmate. The smell of pancakes and syrup tickle their nostrils, and they perk up. "Is breakfast already ready? I thought it would be a while longer before Sadhu finished cooking anything with how much he's been sleeping in." "Oh, Sadhu woke up extra early today. Couldn't go to sleep after he left his bed to blow his nose, so he just decided to freshen up and make an early breakfast." Once they reached the first floor, the dealer's classmate yelled at the top of their lungs, "Hey guys, toilet paper's gone again." "Minda, you know the drill by then, get going." There was a worthlessly cowardly whine from the purple midget, who defeatedly trudged over to the phone, already dialing the number in. The majority of the class, however, groaned in frustration and annoyance, some of them even cursing out loud. As if to reassure them, the dealer shrugged. Did they take anything else, or was it just the toilet paper this time? They asked, already knowing the answer. They'd had to keep their thefts to a random pattern to throw the others off just in case. "Yeah, 2 of the full shampoo and body wash bottles are gone, and the hand sanitizer's gone. The good kinds, too." Yet another collective groan from the others. The dealer could sympathize with them. The good kinds of shampoo were scented with deliciously fruity smells, and the body wash helped act as a skin moisturizer as well. "At least we have the shampoo stash untouched, so there's that. Whoever the thief is, they must understand that this is a time of quarantine. Ida exclaimed, his arms windmilling fiercely as he shouted, "We must conserve supplies as much as we can, and sooner or later, you will be caught. Either cease your actions now, or deal with the consequences when you are caught." If anything, everyone wore a deadpan look on their faces. Ida, did they really think that would work? The dealer deadpanned, and their class president slumped in defeat. "And no, but I truly wanted to get it out of my system," Ida replied. Despite that, he immediately snapped back to his former state of mind and chopped his arms. "Now then, why don't we all get something to eat? Here's to one more day closer to the end of the quarantine." The class cheered up at the thought, whooping as they grabbed food in a jovial mood and animatedly chatted away with each other. The dealer sighed and ran a hand through their hair, before joining the rest of their class. Out of the corner of their eye, they saw Minda looked paler and paler as he spoke to Aizawa into the phone. Evidently, Aizawa must have been losing his patience, putting Minda, who constantly contacted him, this much closer to getting into huge trouble. The dealer hid a malevolent smirk. All according to plan. They perked up as they checked their phone. Another buyer wanted 3 bottles of shampoo and 2 loofahs for 30,000 yen. Well, it wasn't like the others couldn't get more supplies from the school, right? They tapped a reply and hit send once they were done, slipping their phone into their pocket. The next day, 3 girls shrieked at the loss of some perfectly good pomegranate-scented shampoo and 3 new loofahs, unopened. The occupants of Class 1 were getting twitchy, burdened with nervous energy from a forced isolation put into effect by the Japanese government. It seemed that only now, a full month into the quarantine, was it evident that everyone was getting pent up. Naturally, of course, everyone found a certain activity to help relieve all their accumulated stress. The only problem was getting someone to volunteer. So of course, being the adorable and selfless person he is, Midoriya Izuku surprised everyone by stepping forward and volunteering to help with all their stress relief. Despite not wanting to convert their resident cinnamon roll into a cinnamon roll, and a somewhat reclusive longing won over, and so started the temporarily new life for Midoriya Izuku as the dorm commandant. The author has no regrets. For Midoriya Izuku, his day started with waking up, freshening up and brushing his teeth, and going about the day as normal. Wait, no. Everyone had insisted that he use their first names now. Momo had done an amazing job creating butt shorts for Izuku, who had taken the liberty to cut a hole right where his butt would be. Nowadays he wore those in lieu of his shorts, with a somewhat tight old all-might shirt that hugged his frame just right. As he made a small breakfast for himself, his classmates would file in, still sleepy and a bit disoriented. And the guys with morning would. As they sat down and Sadu got started on making breakfast for everyone else, Izuku would pick someone to ride his CCK. Sometimes it was Shadow. Other times it was Kaken. To not show favoritism, he would often spread his choices out and ride the other guys whenever he could. Momo had also made the girls some strap-ons, so sometimes he would ride the girls too. Once breakfast was over, Izuku would either finish off whoever he was riding with an orgasm and slide off. His hole still twitching and filled with cum, Izuku would go to lie down on the couch, his perky butt exposed and open to anyone who wanted to FCK him. If there was more than one person, and there usually was, he would SCK or jerk them off, bobbing his head expertly as he rolled his hips. Though, he always did prefer it up his butt. After a small, tiny, minuscule incident where Toga might have been caught impersonating Tsuyu, they reluctantly let her join in, due to not being able to drop her off at the police station, and not wanting to risk their teachers getting sick from exposing themselves. Alas, Toga joined into the daily life of Izuku the commandant, often sneaking sips of BLD from others and impersonating them as she reamed Izuku silly. There was one time when she transformed into Kaken and she and the real Kaken double-teamed his butt. He liked it, but DMN it was really weird. If someone was feeling pent-up anger, usually they would pull Izuku across their lap and roughly spank them in public. Izuku usually had to grab a pillow to muffle his mons as he was punished, though he couldn't do anything about his irkton. This was often Tenya spanking him for being such an unrepentant harlot, but Izuku could see the somewhat repressed in his eyes before Tenya spanked him. Either way, it ended in a good strong DC King and Izuku's butt stuffed with more cum. Lunch and dinner were often repeats of what happens next. Izuku makes something small for a meal, then rides a lucky person's CCK or strap until they come. However, by then they're most certainly awake, so now Izuku bend over the couch and presents himself to everyone. From there, there's a line of those who don't currently have online classes and those that just want to FCK Izuku silly. He's still surprised that Yuuga knows just how to push all the right buttons, and how Mishura loves the full Nelson position. So far, he's comprised a list of just who uses him the most, really. He has Kaken, Shadow, Achako, Momo, Tenya, and Hitoshi. Really, he's pretty sure they might have a bit of a crush on him. Might. Except Kaken, he just really likes having rough sex with Izuku. Though Izuku doesn't mind. After dinner is a bit of a more special occasion. When everyone's full and sated, they all gather in the living room, and Izuku ends up in the middle of a very large, full circle. From there, he gets stuffed with multiple CCKS and the biggest GNGBNG ever, with multiple CCKS, and strap-ons occupying one hole. So far, he's up to 3 in my butt at once, and 2 in his mouth, but he's training to get to 4 for each. He can do it, he swears. Even if Kaken didn't think he could. Jerk. He's always looking forwards to the daily GNGBNG, to be honest. He can't help but love getting stuffed full of all his friends' CCKS and pumped full of SMN, not that he'd ever admit it in public. The warm feeling lingering in his bottom does wonders to both soothe his aching bottom after a long day of sec, and keep him horny enough to keep going for more. Once everyone's all tired and tuckered out, it's off for a bit of relaxation via some television or video games. Once curfew arrives, Izuku grabs a plug for his butt, rams it up his bottom, and heads back to his room for sleep, wet dreams, and a lot of anticipation for whatever comes next tomorrow. Don't judge, he likes sleeping with the plug in him. He wonders if the others would like to keep this going on the weekends after the quarantine is over. Izuku, for one, could really get used to his temporary lifestyle nowadays. Maybe he'll ask the others tomorrow, see how they react. The thought comforts him into a nice, relaxing, somewhat horny sleep. The watcher stared at the end of the scene of pure debauchery he had just witnessed, then down at his suddenly too tight breathe and the tent he was hella pitching, then back at the screen. There was a massive blush on his nondescript face, and his LC had suddenly dry lips. His mind felt too jumbled to voice anything other than what he was currently thinking. DMN, that boy is such a SLT. Achako Uraraka was an extrovert. And sure, there were plenty of other reasons why quarantine was absolute hell, but that was certainly at the top of her list. The virus had spread faster than anyone could have expected, and UA was quick to send students home from dorms. For a while, they had only canceled classes, and that little bit of time was nice. Despite the chaos and the fear all the students had, they were able to spend time together, and none of them were quite as scared. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. At first, it was nice. She was so happy to be home and see her parents, her home, her bed. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed her bed. The first few days back at the house, she felt great. She stayed up a bit later, she slept in a bit longer, but she kept herself on a routine. Every day, she showered and got dressed like usual. Her mother insisted on it, claiming that if she acted like everything was normal, it wouldn't bother her as much. She'd give her parents a big smile and a big hug each before they left for work. They were essential workers and it made her sort of nervous, but she knew they were being safe. She wouldn't let the smile fall from her face until they were out the door. Every morning, Achako promised her mother and father she would have breakfast. She never did. Every afternoon, Achako would brush off the messages she got from friends asking if she'd eaten lunch, reassuring them with a bunch of happy-looking emojis and as many exclamation marks as she could manage. It wasn't a big deal, she convinced herself. She didn't know why everyone was so worried about her. It was honestly frustrating at first, feeling like people were treating her like an irresponsible child. She knew it was the best option she had for contributing to helping the family during this. They already didn't have much money, but now, it felt like the company was bringing in less and less. Construction projects were getting postponed left and right. Her parents were trying their best to keep this a secret from her, and it almost worked. But then, one night, she had been coming downstairs to say goodnight to them when she heard the hushed conversation at the dining room table. Her parents didn't usually argue, they always seemed happy and laid back. Listening to these strange new tones, thick with panic, they caught her off guard. Every word they flung at each other seemed on edge. It seemed that more than anything, they were concerned about her. She couldn't stand the idea that they were making sacrifices like that and not telling her. After this, Achako was far more aware of things around the house. Her parents were still smiling, but they were quieter, more tired. They hadn't been packing their lunches to take to work like usual, and they never came home for lunch breaks. The first day she realized this, she nearly broke down crying. But that was when she decided that if they were skipping meals to save money and food, she could too. They still had dinners as a family, and she sometimes snacked throughout the day, but she mostly filled her stomach with water for the time being. She slowly got more lethargic, still forcing a smile for her parents every time. It was exhausting, like everyone in the household was putting on a mask to lie to everyone else. She slept more, hoping that would chase away the gnawing feeling deep in her gut. After the first few days, the nausea set in. Going long enough without eating meant that she got so hungry that she felt like throwing up. After a few weeks of this, she had basically tuned out her stomach's incessant growling. At that point, her sleep schedule had almost entirely derailed. She'd hardly sleep, awake at such odd hours that she felt she couldn't even message her friends without them worrying. Though, she already felt like any conversation she had with them couldn't be about something other than quarantine. She wanted so desperately to forget about it, to talk about anything else. It seemed like everyone else was doing well. All she had wanted was to make everyone else smile, and now, it seemed like they didn't need her. She felt so useless, like everyone was happy and for some reason she just wasn't. It tugged at her heart, and she felt so selfish. Why couldn't she just be happy? It was so strong without all of her friends. She was so motivated and energized with all of them around her, supporting her by smiling at her and thanking her for all her strong work. It was the little things like that Achako found herself needing. She felt silly feeling like she needed that sort of validation. But she was struggling with this isolation. Too often, she found herself staring at her ceiling for no particular reason. She would just zone out, feeling tired enough to drift off to sleep but not quite being able to. She was sure she could go to sleep if she really wanted to, but it was the middle of the afternoon and she had only woken up a few hours before. She couldn't help that she was so tired. She thought that maybe it would help if she showered. She knew she should probably, since it had been a few days now, but it was getting harder to drag herself out of bed. She knew her parents were probably becoming concerned about her, but she got away with most of this behavior by saying she was just chilling, or doing homework, or watching a show. There were plenty of good excuses she could pull to not need to leave her room. After a few particularly low motivation days, Ochako had basically ghosted everyone. This was the last straw for Izuku, whose anxiety about Achako's well-being had only been growing since they left the dorms. He'd been trying to stay in contact with her the best he could, but once this unexplained absence began, he knew he'd have to do something about it. She was his best friend, and he was going to help her through this no matter what. After a long talk with his mom, he'd made a decision. He put on a face mask and went for a little walk. The streets weren't too bad, mostly just dead quiet and uncomfortably still. Being outside made it feel like nothing was moving, that the world had stopped turning. Their world certainly had. He thought briefly that it might be more accurate to say that the world was spinning out of control, and maybe that's how it was for some people. But right now, he felt like time was frozen. Everything had been forced to halt and they were stuck living in this strange, monotonous world for some indiscriminate amount of time. At least, he didn't know how long this would last. He didn't know that anyone did. He was fairly lost in thought for those few minutes before he got to Achako's house. Honestly, he was starting to get more nervous to see her. What if she had just stopped talking to him because that's what she wanted to do? What if she had only talked to him before because she had to get along with him, and now that they were in quarantine, she wasn't obligated to humor him anymore? That couldn't be right, but more often than not his overactive imagination and rambling way of thinking led him down some strange paths of thought before he could question how logical they actually were. Now, as he stood staring at her window, it began to dawn on him that he didn't really have a fully thought-out plan. No matter, he could roll with the punches. At first, he wanted to message Ochako, but knew that wasn't going to work at the moment. He couldn't go to her front door or get too close to her, so he made up his mind and took a few steps closer to her window to knock on it. The knocks were timid at first, but after a few stronger ones, he figured it was enough to get her attention. He took a few steps back, maintaining that recommended distance away from her, in hopes that she would open the window. When Ochako heard this, it almost sort of worried her. She had no idea who or what could be hitting her window like this in the middle of the afternoon. So, with a bit of hesitance, she pulled her curtains and then her blinds open. Looking out and seeing Izuku's worried eyes turn excited when he saw her, she almost broke. Suddenly, the hungry ache of her stomach was no match for the guilty, stabbing pain in her heart. Without waiting another moment, she opened the window. The screen still separated them, but this way at least they could talk to one another. Before she knew it, she was crying, but Izuku wouldn't pressure her to talk about it. He never would. He knew that she hated not being able to keep all of her emotions bottled up, so he didn't want to bring it further to her attention. It was obviously at the forefront of her mind already. All he could do was slide his mask down his face to give her a smile, and she sniffled a little before she returned the gesture. For the first time in weeks, it felt like she could really smile. She was still working through the tears, and her voice came out sounding like it had only a fraction of its usual enthusiasm and vigor. I really missed you. The streets were mostly empty. A few people in face masks, rushing to and fro with hastily bought groceries, some essential workers and bicycles, warily eyeing the others. Disinfection crews in hazmat suits, spraying chemicals around. It was both easier and harder to sneak around. Everyone wore masks, glasses, and caps, so it hid her identity already, but the protection of social stealth was completely gone. And cloth face masks were much, much uglier than just wearing another person's face. But since Himiko Toga was out with a higher purpose, she was alright, even if her chin was a bit itchy due to wearing a mask for hours on end. With a hoodie and jeans, her hair in a ponytail, and cute hat on her head, she looked nothing like the Himiko Toga any heroes might be looking for. All but one of the heroes would probably overlook a somewhat shabby dressed girl, out to buy some veggies and dry noodles to make it home. A few might identify her dark green DEKU hoodie, but a couple hundred of them had been peddled by the Hatsume Industries online store last sports festival, so not only crazy-obsessed yanderes now had his merch. Her shopping bag was just a piece of the disguise, though the bento box she had put inside it had a definite purpose in mind, and the snacks she had bought strategically would serve as well. After all, a hero needed quite a few calories, and more so after a BLD donation, to someone so in need. Heroes were essential workers, of course he would. Today there was no need for back alleys, for shortcuts. She could walk out in the open, with little worry that anyone would be paying much attention to street cameras, or that anyone would spot her, which was always a risk when she used her own appearance, as several heroes, like Ochako and Tsuyu, knew her face, and they weren't exactly friends. But it was unlikely she would encounter them. Few heroes had been assigned to the area in an effort to prevent any sort of contagion through them, and all had been ordered to wear filtered face masks. It had been easier for some than for others, and that was a big reason the area she had chosen was particularly understaffed. After all, it would take a few days for the hero Tsukuyomi to get a mask fit for his beak, and his teacher, Hawks, had been ordered not to go out, due to fears his wings might carry the virus. That left just 6 heroes patrolling, 3 each turn: Nejire-chan, Gang Orca, Creati, Charge-a-Bolt, Earphone Jack, and, best of all, Deku. Her Izu, the man of her dreams, the boy of her best nights, the hero who kept trying to pull her to the side of good, even as she did the same to try and turn him. Her everything, and, at times, the BLD donor who kept her Quirk's most negative impulses from overwhelming her, and resulting in a bloodbath for her to sip on. Her strategy was far from flawless, but she hoped that some assertive moves would do it well enough. Evade the other 2, sneak into the closed-off love hotel, give Izuku a heads up on a possible break-in anonymously, ambush him with food and bites and all the good things in life. She spotted the first hero of the day, Earphone Jack. Jiro, nice mask. Combines well enough with the LTHR jacket. That kind of cybergoth style might just be your new thing. Now where's Kaminari? If you two are together, it might be another pair sneaking into the love hotel instead. Toga kept her head down, and didn't even attract a second glance from Jiro. Yeah, just imagine I'm a stranger in one of your concerts, just forget about me. Good. Now, is Kaminari with you? Don't particularly find it difficult to sneak from Momo, her situational awareness could do with work, but Gang Orca's a true pro. Jiro went her own way, and Toga kept on walking. So far so good. Let's keep going and get all the essentials: BLD, cuddles, a nice good FCK. Police presence was minimal as well, but a hazmat crew was quickly approaching, and she had to take a detour to avoid them and any possible questions. From a side street, Toga saw them spray everything with chemicals. Most of the League didn't quite believe the virus was as dangerous as it was touted to be. Compress just wanted to grill, for God's sake. The louder personalities of Twice were getting very stir-crazy, and Spinner had been convinced by some article Dabby had shared with him that the 7G phone towers were to blame. But everyone else knew that Dabby was clearly messing with the Lizardman. The secret Todoroki himself was scared shitless. He didn't just have a weak constitution when it came to handling his ridiculous blue flames. Apparently he also had a pretty bad immune system, which of course explained that time he had been bedridden for a whole week with a simple flu a year back. Shigaraki still used the "I took care of you when you were sick" argument when Dabby PSS him off sometimes, though it had mostly been Tamura gingerly placing ice packs on Dabby while Dr. Yujiko bought an injection for the flu, and then the entire League holding Dabby down to get injected in his bum. Yujiko was dead, for good or bad. Mostly for good, as Toga had learned that the good doctor had, for some reason, tried to change his legal name to be related to some 20th century war crimes and, of course, been denied by the government, plus the part where he was shady as FCK and Toga didn't trust him. But still, she hoped that hell was to his liking after slipping on a banana peel and falling down 12 flights of stairs had cut his villainous career quite short. Shigaraki was doing just fine. An excuse not to try and utterly destroy Hero Society as big as a dreadful virus presented itself once in a lifetime, and he was definitely enjoying it too much. Binging shows, finishing video games that he had not had time for due to being a supervillain leader, even somehow claiming he had a girlfriend at one point. Toga hoped he wasn't spending her strong-earned money on some e-girls page, blowing thousands of yen just to have a girl say his name. Not that Toga would judge, but that was money they could use on cute clothes for her. She had her eyes on a particular dress that was just superb. So if Shiggy was simping, he would get a good smack from Toga. Speak of the devil. Shigaraki, out on the street, looking almost normal in his disguise, clean sweatpants, red sneakers, a very vintage Modern Warfare 2 t-shirt, and, instead of the hand he tended to use there most of the time, a regulation face mask. His hair was combed, for perhaps the first time in his 22 years of life, and he had a bag in hand. That box inside. Chocolates, Tamura. You better have bought those to share. Wait. Hold up. Hold the FCK up. Are those for the girlfriend? I gotta watch this. Shigaraki moved quietly and discreetly, but he was, frankly, a chump at stealth. He wasn't quite as conspicuous as a sleepy Izuku trying to fumble about for his clothes and escape the heart of a villain hideout to make it to 8 a.m. class in time, but it was pretty close. Following him undetected was a breeze for Toga. He walked to a plaza where an elderly couple was walking their dogs, mindful of social distancing by staying almost 7 meters away from each other, and yelling sweet old people things at each other from across the way. Besides those two, and a very bored hazmat crew member disinfecting a lamppost, the place was empty, until she showed up. Energy surging around her arms and legs effortlessly holding her aloft and easing her descent to an almost fairy-like quality, resplendent in her blue, teal and white hero suit, with a pastel-colored face mask, and with those cute little hair lops defying gravity on her head. Nejire Hadu landed among them, greeting the octogenarians happily, waving energetically at the hazmat guy, and even approaching Shigaraki. Interesting. What's this then, eh? Nejire stopped just a short distance away, remembering social distancing was a thing right before her enthusiasm made her get right on Shigaraki's nose. Toga took in the whole situation in. Found it quite charming, the ruthless, deadly villain leader reduced to the shy boy with no experience talking to girls that he truly was by the perky hero. How his legs shook slightly, how it was very much not a natural response to greet her just as casually. But then he stopped. Toga saw him gather courage, and then he said something, too quietly for Toga to hear at the distance she was at. The hell are you saying, Shiggy? She can't be this secret girlfriend, right? Right. It was probably just a regular greeting to stay incognito. It didn't look like anything relationship like ... Then again, Izuku was Toga's first boyfriend, and their flirting didn't look like that. Maybe it's a code. Nah, they definitely ain't together. I'll just get closer and see if I can ask her who else is patrolling. She's an airhead and will forget I even asked in a while, I'm sure. Shigaraki walked away after a quick, polite goodbye, which contrasted enormously with the usual I'm going out to go buy FC King ramen, you goddamn noobs. He usually departed with just a facade. As Shigaraki left, Toga approached the hero girl, stepping loudly and being right in the open so as not to spook her. Izuku had one time leapt 10 meters up in the air when she had snuck up on him and started trying to tickle him, so she had learned her lesson that most heroes simply couldn't detect amazing infiltrators stepping up right behind them. Excuse me, Miss Hero, Toga said, making her voice sound deeper and less cheery, all in hopes of avoiding recognition. Heya, what's up, friend? Nejire-chan answered. At this distance, Toga could notice Nejire's mask actually had a design on it like a Mo puppy's mouth, with the tongue out. It was absolutely adorable. Oh yeah, he's like 2 blocks that way, just turn left from the street where that cute guy left. Cute guy, she means Shigaraki. DMN, girl, you might need some help. In fact, where are you going, Shiggy? Our hideout is not that way, in that direction there's just the cinema, the burger place, and the Love Hotel. If you buy me a burger, all is forgiven. Thanks, Toga said, quickly starting on her way. Her plan was a go, now all she needed was to sneak into that Love Hotel. Oh, Nejire said, reaching for her phone, which she had stashed in a pocket in her belt. An alert. Better alert the guys. She CLC'd on an earpiece that was hidden behind her soft blue mane of hair, and said, Deku. Earphone. Jack, somebody snuck into the Love Hotel. I'm gonna go get them. As she flew away, Toga was pretty sure that Nejire had a smug, content smile on her face. FCKU, Shigaraki, that was my plan. Toga said, shaking her fist at the sky. Izuku Midori across the rooftops with ease and agility, checking all the streets the buildings overlooked for people without face masks, and gatherings larger than 5 people. He wasn't exactly a stickler for the rules, as a secret love affair with a wanted villain probably attested to, but health authorities he would listen to every time, and use his influence as a hero to make sure others followed the health and safety rules as well. He was thankful that his mask already had filters that far exceeded what the health authorities demanded for heroes and other essential workers. Passive filters against particles, active filters against all types of gases. May had truly turned a simple mouthguard into a fully functioning piece of kit. It was just perfect for the situation, and it let him be right in the thick of it helping. UA had given the third years an option, have online classes for theory, or have practice in one of the biggest crises Japan had faced recently. Izuku had made a very easy choice. Compared to keeping a secret as big as Himiko Toga, going out to the streets to keep watch was too easy to decide. Only Inko Midoriya knew about Toga. She had freaked out at first, but had been reassured when Izuku had assured her he would be safe in every sense of the word, and most importantly wouldn't make Inko a grandma just yet. After that, and meeting Himiko, she had been mostly fine with them being together. Mostly, as she was absolutely aghast at the idea of Himiko getting arrested. But both Izuku and Himiko had assured her that they wouldn't let that happen. So far, patrol had been boring. 3.5 hours of touring the city of Misutafu and nagging a few stubborn idiots into going for masks, but besides that, nothing at all. The only thing he had to look forward was a text from Himiko. They had agreed to meet that day. The plan was simple, she would find a suitable, discreet place, and then he'd go there, and she'd likely jump out from a shadow and scare the living daylights out of him. And then they'd do a lot more, of course. Nejire's voice on his earpiece caught him mid-jump, not quite distracting him but making the landing a little rougher. Deku. Earphone jack. Somebody snuck into the Love Hotel. I'm gonna go get them. That's not ... If Himiko had done that, she wouldn't have triggered any alarms. This was someone else ... with the same idea. Senpai, are you doing the exact same thing as me? Oh gods, this will be so awkward if we ever have to tell each other. Himiko had probably noticed as well, as a text arrived a few seconds afterwards. Change of plans, somebody stole my spot. I'll find somewhere else, gimme 10 minutes. Followed by a couple dozen heart emojis. He answered that it was alright, he would of course be fine with whatever place they could find. As long as it isn't her room in the League hideout, that place is difficult to get out from. If the LOV members woke up to use the bathroom or get a midnight snack as he tried escaping, there would be a fight. One time he had broken Dabai's arm in his way out. In another he had needed to throw Spinner to another room, and it had been extremely difficult to explain that time why his uniform had a burn mark near the abdomen. Thankfully Shadow had jumped into his rescue, saying it had been a bit of early training where he had been careless, so there had been no more questions. At least until people had noticed the bite marks on pool days, as well as the hickeys and a few bruises that were not from sparring, rather from bumping against objects in Himiko's bedroom. That had been quite awkward, but he had somehow managed to blush strong enough that it left his skin the same angry red color and the teasing had eventually stopped. He guessed a few classmates had their suspicions. Kakin and Ochako both had valid reasons for disliking Toga, and now that they were together, they probably had the combined brains to figure out any secret Izuku could hold. Ada had almost given him the birds and bees talk, with quite a bit of stress on how knives were not to be used in bed. It had been about the most awkward talk in Izuku's life, and Kami joining in with her boyfriend's lecture on please don't stick your GNTL in crazy, my friend, had made it a bit worse. But he had moved on quite well. That is, until the virus. It had started suddenly, and cases had spread like wildfire. The mortality and infection rates had everyone concerned, and Izuku secretly dreaded how vulnerable Himiko was to it all. If she caught the virus, there was so little she could do. If she tried going to a hospital, she would be arrested the moment she got better. If she tried fighting it at home, the chances of dying were larger. The League had lost their only medic. Yujiko had suffered an accident and died. It was not at all the retribution Izuku would have wanted for the monster that had made the Nomus, but in the end he was gone, and the biggest source of healthcare available to Himiko had vanished that instant. And that was why he was now worried. Their meeting was born out of desperation, out of missing one another too much, out of longing for the touch of each other. It was risky. He was pretty sure that he didn't have the virus, as he showed no symptoms and was in perfect health, but the simple act of going to the street was a risk. The only thing that eased his mind was that Himiko knew how to take care of herself, be it from an enemy hero or a global pandemic. She was resilient, she was a survivor. Izuku's doubts wouldn't stop him from meeting Himiko. If anything, getting over his own fears and insecurities to do so was liberating. His ringtone sounded suddenly, with a loud IAM here that Himiko found adorable for some reason. Izuku himself thought it was the most badass version of the phrase, sampled from a video of one of his fights. Maybe one day he would tell All Might about Himiko, but that would have to be some other time. Close down factory offices, there's some dormitories here with a decent mattress, said Toga's text. Izuku gulped and felt how Ferdy was typing his response, about how he would be there shortly. He could already feel the anticipation, his body so ready to be one with Himiko again. He considered for a second letting the others know about his location, but it would only be suspicious, so suddenly after Nejire had said something similar. Jiro was smart and she might put two and two together, and out the two heroes, and that was definitely not something he wanted. No, he would be discreet about it. With a sprint across rooftops, jumping from building to building, and landing with a roll, Izuku arrived at the factory in good time. Just the thought of Toga's lips against his own, of their naked skin meeting ... he decided to walk the rest of the way instead, as it was just awkward to sprint with the strong on. The factory was not particularly interesting. Closed off due to the virus, with key employees working from home or receiving stimulus funding to stay afloat. This place would be more interesting if they manufactured All Might action figures ... but it will do. At a glance it could be noticed that everything had been turned off except for fire alarms, and that nothing of value had been left behind. The security cameras were dead, which Izuku found a positive. Don't really want any for watching us, Himiko. He found the doors unlocked one by one to lead him to the right place, and decided to focus in that instead of the eerie feeling the empty building gave him. Dormitories. I'm on the right track, he muttered to himself, seeing a sign on the wall pointing down a corridor. The factory probably kept dormitories for guards or overnight workers to rest, but Izuku didn't particularly care. A bed was a bed. As he finally found an unlocked room, Izuku started to walk in, finding it empty at a glance. It was sparsely furnished, and the bed didn't seem to have any springs coming out, so it was all good. Until a weight fell upon him from the ceiling, taking Izuku down to the floor. His eyes widened, trying to see his attacker in the contrast created by the translucent panel on the roof and the person above him. He blinked, focusing on the person, but it wasn't necessary. Nobody else would throw away their face mask in a single, fluid move and reach out to keep his hands pinned to the side. Nobody else would smirk hungrily before embrace his neck. Nobody else would straddle him like that. Nobody else would bit his neck, greedily drinking until she had her fill, and giving it a final LCK from her crimson lips. Just Himiko Toga. His girl, his entire world, his biggest secret. Did I drink too much? Himiko said with a giggle. No, that was ... that was perfect. Her hands were quickly on Izuku's face mask, removing it and throwing it away. She bit her lip in anticipation, closed her eyes, and went in for the embrace. The embrace made every one of Izuku's senses flare up. The subtle sound of their lips meeting, the feeling of her hands joined with his, just beyond his gloves, and how soft and perfect her lips were, the scent of her pomegranate perfume. How appealing she was up close before he too closed his eyes, and most of all, the taste, sweet lipstick, her even sweeter tongue, the unmistakable iron taste of BLD. His BLD. And it was just the beginning. His outfit needed to go. Izuku started rising, holding Toga as she straddled him, first to sit back up, then to kneel and stand. With one hand supporting her legs, with the layers of cloth and LTHR becoming unbearable, Izuku grabbed one of the fingers on his other glove with his teeth, then pulled, releasing it and throwing it away. They might be wonders of engineering and let him use ever more of OFA, but right now he needed to touch, he needed to feel. SWCH hands, he removed the other glove. Just as Toga reached around to embrace his neck again, right where he was most sensitive at. He was even harder now, not even losing BLD had changed that at all. If anything, the pain aroused him to an even higher level. He put her down and pressed yet another embrace on her lips, long and passionate. With his hands and arms free, Izuku didn't waste any time. As one hand fumbled with Toga's belt and jeans button, the other sneaked up her hoodie. To his delight, she was wearing nothing underneath, and his thumb brushing against her rewarded him with a delicious sigh of pleasure. His hands were rough and disfigured by scars, but he still felt everything. Every inch of her skin as his hand caressed her breasts, as he cupped one under her hoodie. The fact that it was a hoodie from his own merch was just perfect. He was hers, that was easy enough to see, but with details like that, he felt like she truly was his. For good. The hand on her jeans lowered the zipper, slowly, and moved right in, tracing his fingers over her panties. They were soft cotton, in a light pink color, and, as he reached down, completely soaked. "I missed you, Izu." Himiko said, breaking from their embrace, gasping as Izuku left her breast, and took her shoulder in his hand, pushing her against the wall. "I see someone missed me too." He hadn't even noticed when her hands had left his shoulders and back and had gone down to tease his DCK. He groaned at it, already feeling overwhelmed. He was still pretty new at SEC, all things considered, but they had both found the things they enjoyed, and wanted to enjoy even more as they kept going. Of course, teasing was a game for two, and, still above her panties, Izuku started to move his fingers. His thumb found her CLT, and he started slow. Himiko's eyes widened, then she closed them, biting her lower lip. Izuku could see her mind already going blank, but she had enough willpower to keep undressing Izuku, which earned her a second or two of respite as his shirt was thrown to a corner, at the same time as she removed her hoodie, with a bit more care, but discarding it all the same. The sight of her bare chest took Izuku's breath away. Her full, perky melons, her abs and shoulder muscles, testament of her skill, strength and agility, her toned biceps, the curve of her hips, that scar on her collarbone, from dueling another knife fighter, that tiny BRTH mark just above her belly button. "Like what you see?" she asked, with a dastardly smirk. She was not shy at all about her body, but only Izuku knew it in such an NTMT manner. "Why yeah, I love it." Izuku was sure that he was grinning like an idiot, and that it was the opposite of S-TV, but he was past caring. He wanted her, he needed her. In every way. An embrace on her neck, then her collarbone, then both breasts. The taste of her ass, her moans of pleasure in his ears, the way her body shook. He had no mercy. With one hand he held her against the wall, with the other he pulled down her jeans, making them drop all the way to the floor. He tried to just move aside the panties, but he was focused on embrace all of her body, too focused ... and he tore the panties by accident. The pieces of cloth fell down among her jeans, and Himiko just stepped out of them. Sorry. I tore your panties by accident." Izuku apologized. He would buy her all the lingerie in the world if she wanted. Well, those panties were a bit old anyway, was gonna throw them out," she said, as Izuku's fingers traced their way around her pelvis, and, by the time his fingers were on her lips, she was fully furred and gasping. Go slow. We haven't seen each other in some time." He nodded and began, slipping in his index finger as she moaned into his ear, eyes wide, hips shaking. In and out, he went, at a steady, slow pace, almost too slow at first, giving her CLT the attention it deserved. "FCK ... that's good ... you can go. Faster now. I'm yours. Make me yours. Do it." As Izuku moved in another finger, going faster, she bit into his shoulder, strong. The stabbing pain of her fangs, of his BLD being LCK'd, of his CCK pressing strong against his underwear, and his breathe ... and the pleasure he was making Toga feel, all exploded as her hips moved uncontrollably, and even her bite wasn't enough to muffle her orgasm. "Was I good?" Izuku asked earnestly. His hand was completely soaked, and Toga's shaky grin was the biggest reward in the world. A bit of 1% full cowl at the end for extra speed had really helped. "More than good. Perfect," Himiko said, taking his hand and LC-king it clean. Finger by finger, making Izuku moan and breathe, feeling her tongue going bit by bit, all the while she looked at him right in the eye. "Himiko, that's ... that's so good, but you wanna FCK me, right? Make love to me, claim me in every possible way?" she asked, placing Izuku's hand on her cheek. "Exactly," Izuku said, and her brought her face in close for yet another embrace. "My turn, then," Himiko said, pushing Izuku onto the bed, taking off his breathe quickly, only pausing to retrieve a condom from his pockets. Grinning, she tore the wrapper and placed it in her mouth, as her hands went up and down Izuku's. With a quick embrace she placed it on Izuku's DCK, and then went as far down as she could with her mouth, before she gagged and moved away. Sorry, I'm not used to this, you." Himiko said, a bit bashfully, but Izuku's happy smile ended that quickly. She lowered the rest of the condom with her hands and eagerly straddled Izuku's hips, placing herself right on top of his CCK, just ready to start. You're the best, Himiko, I really love you. Izuku said, his fingers grabbing onto her loose hair and just admiring how soft and nice her hair was. You just say that because. FCK. That's good. She said as she lowered herself right onto him. She clenched around him and the warmth of her. It was perfect. You just say that cause you get to FCK me, don't you? Because you like how tight I am. Toga asked as she moved up and down. No, Izuku said, the instant he was lucid enough to speak. I really do love you. You'll be the death of me, Izu. Making me fall like this. Himiko almost yelled, between mons of bliss. She was going faster and faster, and her walls were only tighter, practically milking Izuku. He felt his eyes roll to the back of his head as his mind went blank. Nothing in his brain but Himiko, nothing except how they were joined. This is ... you're going. I'm going. Himiko, please. I love you so much. Izuku said, incoherently, just saying whatever his mind managed to grasp as Toga kept riding him. As they got closer, as her mons got louder, looter, as he shivered in pleasure and his hips moved of their own will to FCK her even harder. Izu. I think I'm gonna come again. Come with me, come for me. Do it. You're mine, forever and ever, Izuku, you're mine. She yelled, running her hands through her hair, eyes unfocused, her mouth half open in expectation. Izuku knew that he could make it. She was close, and he could still hold on. Just a few instants longer, resist. Himiko, I'm getting too close. But he made it. Come with me now. Yes. He felt the sweetest release, the connection with Himiko, their shared bliss. Her body still shook as he slid off from inside her, and she rested on his chest, gasping for air. That was fun, Izu. I do mean what I said, you know. You're mine, but only because I'm yours. They shared a soft embrace, still trying to catch their breath. Izuku played with her hair, and Himiko gently traced her fingers around his chest. It tickled a bit. When this FC King pandemic is done, we should really do something about our situation, Izu. Yeah, I don't want to hide anymore, Izuku said, placing an embrace on her forehead. A nap, a meal, and we FCK again. Himiko asked, a sly grin on her face. You don't even need to ask. Shinsu hadn't expected this pandemic to come on so fast. He remembered things most clearly the week before it got to him. He and his friends would be at lunch and make jokes about the vague stories they had heard on the news. They didn't think much of them. Sure, it may have been insensitive, but it didn't feel real. He was nowhere near the epicenter of the event. This outbreak didn't feel like something he had to worry about. It was a Friday evening, and he was alone at home when he got the notification on his phone, a press conference from the president, in which he was declaring a state of national emergency and outlining the changes being made. Shinsu rushed to the living room to search for the remote. Once it was on, he sat on the couch, staring incredulously at the television. Very little was actually registering to him. All the words sounded fuzzy and he just sort of found himself sitting in a stunned sort of disbelief. The last thing he heard from the broadcast was a medical professional urging people to do what they could, stay home, and let these proactive measures limit the strain society would be put under. Proactive measures. Shinsu was fairly ignorant of the situation, but that felt like bullshit. His mind was reeling, his eyes glazing over as the light from the TV illuminated his face on that cloudy afternoon. He didn't hear his name being screamed until maybe the 5th time when the door into the kitchen slammed open. His mother rushed in, arms full of plastic bags. Groceries, we got groceries. Help. She barely had time to slide the straps from her arms before she was turning on her heels to run outside. His father only had time to stop Shinsu because he was still snapping out of a haze. The voice of the president still filled the room, a droning background noise of nonsense. He handed Shinsu something bulky, wrapped in a cloth. It's mine. Put it on, they think it can survive in the air for up to an hour. As the cloth fell, Shinsu was able to examine the firefighter's gas mask for just a moment before his father urged him to put it on. Shinsu was grateful that it was the weekend. People had been advised to stay home, and his parents were both rushing like it was the end of the world. It wasn't like he was going to do anything anyway, it just meant he didn't have to argue with his mother about staying home from school. She had already made it clear that he was officially on house arrest. This was the most frustrating, as he was sure he would want to hang out with friends soon, and he would want to go to school. They had brought home a surprising amount of food. This all seemed really unnecessary to him, but his mother worked for the government, so he had to assume she knew more than he did. He couldn't imagine whatever this mysterious illness was could be bad enough for all this. Every snippet of news he had heard hadn't been anything of substance. It all just felt like hearsay. He was frustrated with the lack of information, but he supposed there was nothing he could do about it but listen to professionals, though that didn't exactly sit well with him. As they finished stocking their pantry, fridge, and freezer, Shinsu gave a casual wave to his parents before returning to his room. Proactive measures. What could they be so scared of? He found himself lost in thought as he slipped his mask off, his hands fiddling with it for just a moment before he set it down. The weekend was fairly uneventful. It was actually kind of nice. Both of his parents had agreed to get out of all their commitments except for work, so they were home the whole time. They had home-cooked meals and a board game night Saturday evening. Shinsu won, of course, as he always did. They were all quickly reminded why they didn't play these games too often as Monopoly money was being violently thrown across a table, and property cards were strewn everywhere as they were frantically being mortgaged. Regardless, they found themselves laughing more and more, happy to spend time with one another. Sunday evening, everything was a little tenser. Shinsu couldn't understand why his mother was making such a big deal about him staying home from school. Some schools in the area were shutting down to prevent the spread of infection, but UA hadn't yet. Still, his mother demanded that he stay home Monday. That evening, he got in an argument with her and it ended in a screaming match. Shinsu noticed that she was running around all of his questions. She managed to avoid truly answering any of them, and they both got tired of this after a while. Shinsu stopped talking to her after she couldn't avoid answering his big question. If it's such a big deal, why aren't you staying home from work? She clammed up at that, and she had to bite her tongue and end the discussion. Because I have work to do. He got no final word, just silence in the household for the rest of the evening. There were things she wasn't telling him. He knew that, and there wasn't anything he could do to change it. As much of this was based in his frustration at the situation, an equal amount was worry for his parents. He wanted them to be all right, and right now, he couldn't quite grasp the situation. He didn't know how serious it was, how dangerous it might be. But his mother had been acting strange. His parents weren't the type to keep things from him, either, so all he could do was hope for the best. The next morning, he woke up to a note. It's my last day, all right. I love you. The black-haired man looked at the chirpy, overgrown bird next to him. He was adjusting his golden-colored glasses, crumbs around his mouth, brown paper bag beside him on the pile of crates. What a baby. Because I got stuck with a clown like you. Offense taken, I am not a clown. He wiped his mouth of the crumbs and fanned out his wings, pointing at them proudly. I'm a hawk. Dabby glared at him. You're nothing but a dumbass. He looked around, trying to comprehend the horrifying thought that he was stuck with this chicken or whatever the FCK he was, for God knows how long. Somehow, an altercation had led to the two of them getting trapped together in an abandoned warehouse. Dabby hadn't really wanted to burn those pretty feathers and land himself in even more trouble if any of the others showed up, so he stayed there silently, boiling on the inside. Stupid quarantine. Would you like some chicken? Hawks held out a skewer with fried chicken on it. It was cooling, but it smelled delicious, and both were going to be trapped in here for an unknown amount of time. Who knew how much food they'd have? Give it here. He pulled a hand out of his pocket and held it out, reaching for the skewer, only to have Hawks take it away at the last second and take a happy bite into it. He peeked at Dabby with one eye. It's not very safe to take food from random people during this time, especially a big bad hero like me. Dabby flared his nostrils and closed his eyes, holding back a sniff of laughter. Who knows? I could have had the virus, and a quirk like yours would have been the absolute worst. Are you trying to be a pain in the butt? No, I'm trying to be safe. He poked the air with the skewer. Enough about me. I'm actually dying to hear about what you villains are off to at this time. That doesn't concern you, Dabby said, shoving his hands back into his pockets and sitting down on a crate, crossing his legs. He closed his eyes and bowed his head. He really wasn't in the mood to waste his breath on useless chit-chat. Oh come on, I already told you what's up on our end. Dabby looked up. Like what? He asked drearily. Are you all just eating? No, of course not. Hawks leaned forward and put a hand up to his mouth conspiratorially. We're actually trying to figure out which place is the best to get food, you know. Which one has the best DLVRY and all. What? You know, that place just up the street from here. Hawks did a chef's embrace. The best food. But their DLVRY. He shuddered. Not so great. Definitely recommend it if you're going out. With someone. He winked. Dabby looked at Hawks and rolled his eyes. Endeavor and I went out recently actually. Not on a date. Mind you, more as business partners ... and we had dinner in the most loveliest and expensivest place ever. He tusked. Such a shame that it was destroyed by the Namu. I would have really liked to go back there. And why are you telling me this? Dabby sounded exasperated. Hawks gave Dabby a look that screamed, are you stupid? Because it's so useful at a time like this. Come on, nobody's supposed to leave their house at a time like this and they're pretty much all using online DLVRY, except for all those dunces who still go outside. I have to make sure they don't go outside in what should be like a free vacation. He huffed and took an angry bite. My poor feathers have to work so strong all the time. Oh please, you're the number 2 hero. You can literally take a break whenever you want. Dabby crossed his arms and looked up at the man on the crates. Yes, but the ratings, Dabby, it's all about the ratings. I have to be good for all my fans out there. I was an Endeavor fan when I was little, for as long as I can remember, and he has never failed to exceed my expectations for him. Dabby looked away and muttered to himself. Must have had pretty low expectations then. What was that? Nothing. Continue your spiel. The ratings are what's special about being a hero. Just imagine. During this quarantine, if I can find the best takeout place, I get more fans, more credits, and more free food whenever I want. He sighed and picked up another skewer from the bag beside him. You know what I miss the most during this time? What? Eating out. You should never take these things for granted unless they're finally taken away from you. Valuable lesson I learned from this quarantine. Silence. What do you miss the most? Dabby looked down at his black shoes as he tried to think of what he missed the most. He couldn't really think of anything he missed a lot. I miss being able to have my room all to myself, I guess. Oh my god, actually though, I can never have a moment of peace. Just imagine your room. Now imagine the usual intruders. Multiply that by 7. He sat back and folded an arm across his chest. That's how many I get in 1 hour. 1 single hour. Okay, cool. Look man, if you didn't want to talk you could have just said so in the beginning. I would have left you alone. Dabby almost gaped at him. He was never one to show visible anger, but his eye twitched ever so slightly. You were the one who offered me the chicken in the first place, he said quietly, about to short-circuit. Oh, Hawks burst out laughing. He reached into the bag and pulled out another one. Is this what it's all about? He chuckled. You just wanted one, why didn't you just say so? I would have given it to you. Begrudgingly, Dabby reached out a hand before stopping. Where did you buy it from? He asked monotonously. I got it from the restaurant up the street, Hawks said happily. 100% safe, I watched them make it from the counter. They offered me so much I just couldn't refuse. Here, I'd love to share. Dabby took the skewer with one scarred hand and stared at it for a bit. Finding a crate, he sat down and held a hand below the food so that it wouldn't spill on the concrete floor below them. He inspected it closely and hesitantly sniffed it. Hawks watched him encouragingly, nodding him on. Go on, it's perfectly fine. Dabby knew he shouldn't trust a hero so easily, and he'd never let his stomach guide him before, but something told him that this hero was different. And besides, it was free food. Oh well, he shrugged and bit into it. Okay, last one, here we go, the overseer announced to himself after having watched many universes handle their situations differently. Who the hell are those people and cat? He had asked himself after skimming through some more plain universes and found a world where people he had never seen in any other reality so far, which intrigued him all the more. Universe 9,375,074. We're seriously doing this, man? Ryuji asked the group, looking towards their joint leaders, Izuku and Akira, who were both talking with each other in lab length before Ryuji asked his question. Yes, I would find this highly questionable to do considering the circumstances. Are you sure we're ready? Yusuke asked, looking towards them and then turning towards Ada, who was also slightly irate due to him worrying about what could happen. We know for a fact that shadows when inflicted with despair perish in only a minute or two, and that despair comes about during flu season. Considering we're above even the flu right now, it would make sense that it would be easier to dispatch shadows and collect treasures from the collective unconsciousness, Izuku explained before Akira continued on. This should make taking down the Reaper a cinch, as he is just like any other shadow. Just insanely strong. Akira started to doubt himself a little at that. Right now the trigger virus had gotten the country into an uproar, and as such they felt it was the perfect time for the Phantom Thieves to strike their smaller clientele. But to take down the Reaper would be a big deal. So it's agreed, the Phantom Thieves are going to face the Reaper. Morgana announced to the group of gathered UA students, Shujin Academy students, a cyber terrorist, Kosei High School student, Madaram's disciple, and a talking cat. Yeah, the group cheered aside from Ada, who piped up, we are going to have to maintain social distancing. Considering the metaverse works on cognition, it's likely if we don't follow some health precautions that are seen to guarantee safety, we could be dealing with deadly stakes. Ada said somewhat solemnly, to which he saw Yusuke agree after closing his eyes and thinking about it. With that, the group one by one entered mementos to space out. First the leaders, Akira and Izuku, then the brawlers, Bakugo and Ryuji, the blue-haired duo of Ada and Yusuke, the animal-themed pair of Morgana and Tsuyu, the scouters, Futaba and Jiro, the trained fighters, Mikoto and Mirio, the other girls in pairs of Uraraka and Anne, and Haru and Pony, and finally Monoma, who would have been paired with Hachai but he was on official matters. In Memento's first floor, the walls were a slightly yellowed color compared to their near almost completely red and black that they usually were, perhaps indicating that the virus had affected Mementos more than the thieves could realize. Pus-like ooze leaking through small cracks in the walls like an infection. The Phantom Thieves had their costumes on, masks included. But the heroes had to supply their own masks, for their persona were not born from rebellion but from facing themselves. As such, they held no transformed state, which was certainly annoying. Izuku was wearing a variation of his first hero costume's headgear, bunny-like ears included, as they all needed to wear masks. This was his best at actually concealing his identity. Tsuyu was wearing her hero headgear too. Ada had a less helmet-like variation of his hero headgear. Uraraka and Bakugo had something concealing their identity more than their normal masks would, with Bakugo having a mouthguard alongside his eyepiece and Uraraka having a helmet where most of the front was opaque and only her eyes' space were translucent. Monoma had a Phantom of the Opera mask on, considering his flair for the stylish, even if it wasn't as much as say Aoyama, while Pony wore a bandana because in her words bandanas are cool. Mirio had a helmet resembling a knight's helm with a crown on it. He felt like anything like Lemillion would be a bad call considering what had happened before joining, so he based his mask on his persona King Arthur. Jiro simply wore a purple visor considering that her persona arc was a support type like Futaba's, that had limited combat, Applications. Remember 6 feet both Ada and Yusuke stated, which means no Mona travel. This trek is going to be on foot. Yusuke concluded, before Akira nodded and signaled for the group to follow in a semi-weird block formation with Ada, and Yusuke maintaining order in the very back and yelling mainly at Ryuji or Pony for messing it up. The path of Kimurnut went by pretty quickly considering how weak the shadows were normally, and the despair that had set in made the fights go by near instantly. Even if they had to walk the place, and collected a few onyxes and pearls from around mementos, which Futaba had theorized as being longing that had manifested from multiple people which when removed slowly lessen their more aggressive impulses, or were the longing of the dead which still lingered, as treasure. The path of Aetzbus, however, took far longer. Like the prior path, it had grown a yellow puss-like quality to its cracks, and had turned the path from light blue to a sickly green in tone and had caused some in the party to start feeling a little nauseous. This is totally gross, right? I'm not the only one who thinks that, Anne had asked after treading in a splotch of the yellow puss and screaming. Holy shadows seemed to be unaffected by whatever was going on. In fact, the archangels that could be encountered were stronger than they had any right to be, even if they still went down without a problem. This was odd but not too worrying yet. The Reaper was anything but holy. They had heard the rattling of chains eventually, but they were already nearing the end of the path by the time the telltale sign of the Reaper could have been heard. The path of Kemda was the most disgusting so far, having large patches of bubbling yellow pus and dripping mucus-like qualities coming from the walls, so much so that Ryuji decided to hurl in one of the corners after catching a whiff of the smell. Mementos had become itself infected by something. The cognition was rotting due to people's belief and mindscape on the outside, certainly worrying the phantom thieves as this was only the third path, and there were at least 4 more they could venture to before it would be too risky to do so on foot. More treasures were gathered as they went along, and new items that were likely only there due to the virus, such as sterile gloves that cured small status ailments when worn, or painkillers which functioned as normal. Hold up guys, Futaba had stated after reaching the final floor of the path. Something is definitely wrong. There are 2 exits to this floor, not one, and both feel far more dangerous than the next path should be. Are we sure we want to continue? We can handle it. It's not like we didn't come here to defeat the Reaper. We can handle the 4th path easily, Makoto had said, although somewhat less confident than her words would have given on. Don't be FC King wusses, I might get an actual FC King challenge at this point. Bakugo had bragged, to which Uraraka strangely agreed, getting pumped and emitting a dark aura like at the sports fest. She and Bakugo were both on the let's FCK them up mindset. While I would normally detest agreeing with one, Amonoma joked. After having his shadow of jealousy fixed, he wasn't nearly as pig-headed. Bakugo makes a good point. We have beaten multiple crime lords at this point and are planning to go after more. Nothing short of God himself scares me. It didn't solve his arrogance. Monoma started his maniacal laughter he was known for before he was whacked by Pony, who was the honorary kendo of the group that reeled Monoma in. I needed that, he admitted before calming down. Most of the rest talked and argued amongst themselves before they came to a decision put forward by Haru. The phantom thieves face any threat correct, then we will face the new path, and the Reaper with extreme gusto. Haru was very sweet but violent when she wanted to be. She and Uraraka had fun working together on that with Bakugo. So the thieves traveled down the unknown path towards their target. On the path of Qlifoth, Tree of Death. What the hell is this place? Ryuji asked after seeing that their next destination was a single floor that had opened into a massive open space, revealing a humongous tree that bore skull-shaped fruit, and held a hospital in the bark of the tree surrounded by a graveyard. I guess you could call it the Palace of the Reaper. At least that's the best I can come up with, Morgana explained, staring at the tree that seemed to be petrified and SCKing or possibly expelling the rotten pus-like substance that they had encountered in the earlier paths. F for real, Ryuji shouted, causing almost everyone to shush him considering they had no idea what was in store for them. From what I can get a sense of, the hospital is not that big with only a few rooms inside. The Reaper has transported itself inside and a treasure is already inside. But we didn't send a calling card. That's totally not concerning at all, Jiro sarcastically remarked, trying to hide her fear. Then that should mean that he was expecting us, Kiro. Did the Reaper plan for us? Or is it just always like this? Or did the virus and people's thoughts bring this into existence? Suyu pondered with a finger near her mouth as she crouched down. Then that means all we had to do is take the treasure and actually, what would happen if we did that? Mario began getting excited to do some good before considering what could happen. No idea. For all we know, it could cause people to embrace death, to fear it more, to live life to the fullest. Or maybe it would do nothing even related to death and just makes people more aware of the virus. Honestly, I have no idea what will happen if we pull this off, but it isn't like we have much of a choice. If we want to beat the Reaper, he is right there waiting for us. Emro had that treasure is as good as our. Morgana announced, starting to get his treasure fever like usual. So the ragtag group walked towards the tree, and saw the names on the tombstones shifting as they looked at them. First it was people they know who had died, Night Eye stinging the most for Mirio and Izuku due to its recency, and Nana Shimura even appeared for a fraction of a second. Then they shifted to general names, likely of people who were dead. who is Minato Arasado. Akira had asked for seemingly no reason before shaking his head and going on his way into the hospital, which just screamed haunted murder factory, or creepy science experiment lab more than hospital. It was very small, however, and the only shadow was the Reaper itself, which fittingly was in the morgue, with the rest stop being in the ICU, which seemed to show the body of All Might for some reason. Were they people who had been near death itself? There was also a boy with blue hair who seemed to have a young boy in striped clothes standing next to his bed, which no one could interact with, but was the only visitor in the whole hospital. Just outside the morgue, the group had decided to prepare anything they could need. We can't risk anything. Make sure you have your weapons equipped and quirks primed. We have one shot at this and I don't want any deaths on my hands, Akira bluntly stated, knowing he had to be deathly serious. As they passed through the door, they saw three things aside from the Reaper. A pale mask that looked like it was made of ice with spiked horns on a pedestal marked Mask of the Night Queen. A painting hung behind it depicting a figure made of two bodies holding hands facing away from each other with a face with a shroud in the center of the two bodies titled the Night Queen. Finally, there was a statue in the center of the room that the Reaper seemed to be kneeling at, with a pale-faced statue with black holes for eyes and something similar to a crown atop its head that spread out above its black hair. Its body was coated with marbled black feathers, a weird armor on its arms and lower torso that seemed to almost look like a dress with black wing-like protrusions on its lower body. It was unmistakably feminine but didn't outright look like a woman. The statue was titled the Night Queen Nyx's Avatar. It's worshipping it, Makoto asked, confused as to what was happening. The Reaper turned around, picking up its two guns it had placed down when kneeling, his chains rattling. Bloodstained black cloaks flowing as it seemed to speak. You defile ground of dead. Defile ground of Night Queen. Defile ground of the fall. It fired its guns in the air. My treasure is the queen. It's like this shadow has an ego. Morgana was puzzled. Perhaps it materialized one due to the virus effect on mementos. Tree is death. Tree is ... Nyx. The Reaper seemed to connect everything towards this deity of death, like Nyx was his boss or something. What is the fall? Izuku had asked, his inquisitive nature getting the better of him, causing the Reaper to turn towards the boy. Fall is end. Fall was stopped, was all it said before it started its attack, firing directly at Izuku and almost piercing him were it not for his full cowling 15%. With the bullets grazing his inner arm and chest, searing his skin, before he got up in its face without being warned by either Futaba or Jiro that the Reaper was more powerful than it had ever been before. Its one singular eye locked on Izuku before trying to cast Megidaleon on the group. Bakugo dodged with his explosions, barely dodging the almighty attack that it threw out. Akira was knocked out of the way by Ryuji, who was almost knocked unconscious, barely clinging on before Yusuke ran past with a healing bead, knowing that they would need all hands on deck. Mirio's entire thing was dodging and Ida was all about speed, but almost everyone else was struck by Megidaleon. DDMN, he is so goddamn strong, Ryuji exclaimed while Akira SWCH to Titania to heal the party. Everyone was getting up, having been shown the Reaper's power. Ada tried multiple times to hit the guns out of the Reaper's hands, failing each time and only drawing the ire of the powerful Shadow, letting loose a one-shot kill on the speed hero as he exchanged an Agidine on the Reaper from his persona, charming a princely figure who seemed to be at odds with Mirio's Arthur. Everyone who could gather around in groups to attack the Reaper from as many angles as possible. Bakugo, Makoto and Haru were going into it when his back was turned to deliver physical strikes and slashes to its spine, with Yusuke and Tsuyu in the background aiming to try and jam the Reaper's guns with bullets and throwing needles. Monoma had been working alongside the duo to use ice to set up barriers due to his persona Phantom, who was basically a floating phantasm that mimics the Phantom of the Opera, and delighted in using ice and darkness, alongside Yusuke, Susanoo and Tsuyu's Kiri, who all worked with ice. Izuku meanwhile was being battered back and forth by a maelstrom of bullets that he had to keep dodging with full cowling, and was barely hanging on, constantly using his persona as a booster, his persona being Sherlock Holmes. How some personas were fictional confused Izuku constantly, but he had no time to question that. Uraraka and Pony were teaming up because they were both using a combination of their quirks and persona to fly, Uraraka and Pony each riding a horn from Pony's horn cannons, while being partially weightless and seemingly trying to make light of the situation while inside knowing this was a fight for their lives. Galileo and Earhart, their personas were using Psy and Wind to keep them floating and going on, while spamming high-powered spells. Damage was what they needed, and they were going all out. Galileo being essentially a wizened old man with a telescope for a head and robes over their body, and Earhart being a part mechanical plain woman. Jiro and Futaba were working in tandem to boost and charge multiple members of the group, with Jiro trying to stab into the Reaper's single eye, only just managing to get one off due to flying in with her persona arc and getting Bakugo's nobleman persona to cause a huge incendiary blast when charged with a magic amp when mixed with his own powerful quirk. Haha, take that FCKER, he yelled, seeing the deadly creature taken down a peg, which seemingly caused the spouting the yellow puss, the Reaper's possible power source right now. All-out attack, yelled Ida, having almost blown out his engines running as a distraction, but the Reaper's gun skills were too much and caused the boy to overexert himself to survive. Ada started the assault with a recipro burst kick to the chain-bearing Reaper's skull, which was quickly followed by the rest of the thieves ganging up on the downed enemy with quick bursts of power, causing the shadow to disperse most of its power out in an explosion that saw the puss ooze out and seep into the ground. Bakugo tried to take the Reaper's guns too, but they too soon dispersed. Beaten. Treasure not for mortal hands. Virus. Needed. For fall. A ... pat ... The Reaper faded away, to return again another day. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief at that, but the palace didn't crumble away, meaning the treasure was still inside. Thankfully Morgana was their personal treasure tracker, and he revealed that the mask was the treasure. After her escape from the hospital, the tree seemed rather than to crumble and splinter, it seemed to revitalize. If the tree was death, then they had just brought some amount of life to the place by removing the treasure. The tree was infecting mementos, but the tree itself was infected by whatever was being channeled through the Reaper and the mask. After having escaped, the group returned to the top of the public's palace, content but also extremely exhausted. Akira and Izuku, however, had one last thing to do before leaving and visited the Velvet Room together. The Velvet Room, a place between mind and matter, dreams and reality. Welcome, inmates. You seem to have pulled off a great deed. Justine had announced. Our MSDR could not be here at the moment as he has other matters to attend to. What is it you seek? And be quick about it, inmates, Caroline barked before hitting their cell doors. Well, we just wanted to know, started Izuku. What is the fall? And what does this mask mean? Akira handed the mask over. Very well, inmates, you have performed a deed of some renown. We shall answer as best we can, Justine announced. The fall is the end of all things, an event prevented once before when death itself became human. Well, partly human at the very least. Humanity was believed to have wished for its end, and death obliged as the avatar of Nyx. Only by the power of the universe arcana was Nyx stopped by the sealing of the malevolent Erebus, which would have truly started the fall. The boy who did it had death as a part of him, and had grown close to our sister Elizabeth. She is still searching for a way to save him, the fool. Caroline sneered. Minato Arasado was his name. It all gets very complicated, so Justine, and I will spare most of the details. As for that mask, it holds some of Nyx, or at least the real version did, and that treasure has some connection to the Night Queen. But in the real world it will be a normal item even if brought back into the cognitive realm. If I were to hazard a guess as to what it was doing, I would say it infected mementos due to a small crack in the seal that our sister caused and is likely repairing, causing a mini fall in the form of a virus, much like how apathy syndrome came before the prior halting of the fall. Erebus must have latched onto it and infected mementos itself. Then humanity's own will made the problem worse, fearing an end of days and believing they deserved it, and wishing for their god to save them. Justine monologued to herself, pondering some of the nature of the mask, not bothering to explain apathy syndrome and other elements due to their prisoners not needing to know everything. The mask was also used for some stupid play once, but I don't have all the details. Humans always seem to wish for their own destruction. The fools, Caroline smirked before sending their inmates away for wasting her time and handing the mask back. Leblink. The mask merely turned into a newspaper on the day of the death of one Minato Arasado, a student of Gekuken High. Well, that was dark, Izuku noted, sacrificing your own life to save the world from humanity's wish for death. Izuku had gone stark white. At the very least we helped minimize the effect of the virus, Kiro. Maybe, hopefully, all in all today's been a bit of a bummer, hasn't it? Suyu noted, kinda still processing the fact that they had just defeated the Reaper and trying to bring hope and some lightness to the group even if faltering and questioning at the end. It was only 2 weeks later when the virus had let up almost entirely and had become truly ineffective. The group celebrated by going to a movie together and suggested the cake night rises. So of course they went, or else Morgana would use Akira's phone to text them to go to bed every day for the next few weeks. God, he was such a simp for Anne.